9 crying babies. 1 broken man. 0 chance of success. That's what everyone said when Daniel Carter walked into St. Mary's orphanage in 1979 and made the most insane decision of his life. "I'll take them all," he whispered, his voice cutting through the storm outside. The nurse dropped her clipboard. The director called him mad. But Daniel had already lost everything that mattered, what was left to fear. If you've ever wondered how far one person's love can stretch before it breaks, stay with me until the end of this story. And please comment below which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this incredible tale has traveled. The rain hammered against the windows of Daniel Carter's empty house like fists demanding entry. He sat in the darkness, a 42-year-old man who had aged 20 years in the past 6 months. The chair across from him. Anne's chair remained exactly as she'd left it, the half-finished knitting still draped over one arm, waiting for hands that would never return. "You're going to sit there forever, aren't you?" The voice belonged to Martha, his sister, who had let herself in with the spare key for the 3rd time that week. She flicked on the lights, and Daniel winced at the sudden brightness that exposed the truth of his existence. Unwashed dishes piled in the sink, newspapers scattered across the floor, and him unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same clothes he'd worn for 3 days straight. "Daniel, this isn't what Anne would have wanted." "Don't." His voice came out rough like sandpaper against wood. "Don't tell me what she would have wanted." Martha moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor that Anne had insisted they install just 2 years ago. "It'll last forever," Anne had said, running her hand along the smooth surface. "Long after we're gone, this floor will still be here." She'd been wrong about that. The floor had outlasted her by 6 months already. "I brought you some food," Martha said, setting a casserole dish on the coffee table. "It's that chicken thing you used to like." "Used to?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "I used to like a lot of things." Martha sat down in Anne's chair, and Daniel's entire body tensed. She always noticed everything, but didn't move. The pastor called. "He's concerned. You haven't been to church since the funeral, I know." Daniel stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, the storm was getting worse. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty playground across the street. Anne had loved watching the children play there. She'd stand at this very window, her hand pressed against the glass, a wistful smile on her face. "We were supposed to have children," he said quietly. "That was the plan. Get married, buy the house, have kids. We did everything right, everything in order. But God had other plans, didn't he, Kaishu?" "Daniel, 15 years we tried, Martha. 15 years of tests and treatments and prayers and disappointments. And just when we'd finally accepted it, just when we'd made peace with being a family of 2, he took her too." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm outside. Martha stood smoothing her skirt, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "I should go. Robert will be wondering where I am." She paused at the door. "The food will keep for a few days in the fridge. Please eat something." After she left, Daniel remained at the window. The playground was empty now, the swings moving like ghosts in the wind. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes. Anne's last words echoed in his mind, as they did every night. "Don't let the love die with me, Daniel. It's too precious to waste. Find somewhere for it to go." But where could love go when its destination had been ripped away? How could he give what he had to someone who no longer existed to receive it? The thunder crashed overhead, and Daniel grabbed his coat. He couldn't sit in this house another minute, couldn't stare at Anne's chair or her photographs or the future they'd planned that would never come to pass. He needed to walk, to move, to outrun the grief that chased him like a shadow. The rain soaked through his coat within minutes, but he didn't care. He walked without direction, his feet carrying him through streets he'd known all his life but which now felt foreign and strange. Everything was different when you walked it alone. He passed the grocery store, where Anne used to spend 20 minutes choosing the perfect tomatoes. The library, where she'd volunteered every Tuesday. The park, where they'd had their first kiss 23 years ago, when they were both too young to know that love could end in anything but happiness. The storm intensified, driving most people indoors, but Daniel kept walking. His feet splashed through puddles that reflected the streetlights like broken mirrors. He turned corners without thinking, climbed hills without feeling the strain in his legs. He was a man trying to walk out of his own skin, to leave behind the person who had been half of something and was now nothing at all. That's when he saw it, St. Mary's Orphanage. The building loomed before him, a massive Victorian structure that had stood on this hill for over 100 years. Daniel had passed it countless times, but had never really looked at it. Now, with the rain streaming down his face and lightning illuminating its Gothic towers, it seemed to call to him. He stood at the gate, his hands gripping the cold iron bars. Through the windows, he could see lights, warm yellow lights, that spoke of life inside while the storm raged without. Without conscious thought, his hand moved to the gate latch. Sir, are you all right?" A young woman in a nurse's uniform stood just inside the gate, an umbrella in her hand. She looked at him with concern, this rain-soaked stranger, gripping their gate in the middle of a storm. Daniel's voice failed him. What was he doing here? What possible reason could he give for standing at an orphanage gate at 9 o'clock on a storm-torn Thursday night? "You should come inside," the nurse said, opening the gate. "You'll catch your death out here." Death. The word almost made him laugh. Couldn't catch what had already caught you. But he followed her inside his shoes, squelching against the polished floors. She led him to a small office, handed him a towel, and disappeared for a moment, returning with a cup of hot coffee. "I'm Sister Catherine," she said, sitting across from him. "Though everyone just calls me Kathy. I'm the night nurse here." "Daniel," he managed. "Daniel Carter." "Well, Mr. Carter, what brings you to St. Mary's on a night like this?" He opened his mouth to make up an excuse to apologize for the intrusion and leave, but what came out surprised him. "My wife died 6 months ago, cancer." Kathy's face softened. "I'm so sorry. We couldn't have children. Tried for 15 years, but..." He shrugged, the towel still draped around his shoulders. "She told me not to let the love die with her. But I don't know what that means. I don't know how to love anything anymore." Before Kathy could respond, a sound cut through the storm, crying. Not just one child, but multiple voices rising in a symphony of infant distress. Kathy sighed. "I'm sorry, I need to check on them. We're terribly short-staffed tonight." She stood, then paused. Would you like to come? Sometimes it helps to see that there's still life in the world, even when we feel dead inside." Daniel found himself following her through corridors lined with children's drawings and motivational posters. The crying grew louder as they climbed a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. Kathy pushed open a door, and Daniel stepped into chaos. The room was large but felt cramped with equipment. 9 bassinets were arranged in neat rows, and in each one a baby cried. The sound was overwhelming, a wall of need that seemed to press against him from all sides. "We just got them yesterday," Kathy said, raising her voice over the noise. She moved between the bassinets with practiced efficiency, checking diapers, adjusting blankets. 9 baby girls, all born within weeks of each other, all abandoned at different hospitals across the state. Someone in administration had the bright idea to bring them all here, but we're not equipped for this many infants at once. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway watching her work. The babies were tiny, their faces red with crying, their little fists waving in the air, like they were fighting against the world that had already rejected them. "Here," Kathy said, pressing a bottle into his hands. "If you're going to stand there, you might as well help. That one there, the one in the yellow blanket. Her name's Grace, she's the smallest." Daniel approached the bassinet like it might explode. The baby Grace was indeed tiny, smaller than the others, her cries weaker but no less desperate. He picked her up awkwardly, surprised by how light she was, how fragile. The bottle found her mouth, and suddenly, miraculously, the crying stopped. Grace looked up at him with dark eyes that seemed too knowing for a creature only weeks old. Her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, and something inside Daniel's chest, something he'd thought had died with Anne, stirred to life. "You're a natural," Kathy said, but Daniel barely heard her. He was lost in those eyes, in the weight of this small life in his arms. "What will happen to them?" he asked. Kathy's face darkened. "They'll be separated. Adopted out if they're lucky, though black babies." "Piss," she trailed off, but Daniel understood. This was 1979. The world was changing, but not fast enough. "More likely they'll grow up here or in foster homes. Together for now, but not for long. The state doesn't like keeping sibling groups together, especially not groups this large. They're sisters, not by blood, but by circumstance. They came into this world alone and they found each other here. For a few weeks, maybe a month, they'll have each other. Then..." She shrugged, a gesture heavy with the weight of system failures and broken futures. Daniel looked around the room. 9 babies. 9 little girls who'd already been rejected by the world once. The one in his arms had stopped drinking and was now just looking at him, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep. "What are their names?" he heard himself ask. "Grace, like I said. Then there's Faith, Hope. Someone had a theme going: Mary, Sarah, Rebecca, Joy, Rose, and Elizabeth. Though honestly, with the way things are going, they'll probably get renamed by whoever takes them." Daniel moved to the next bassinet, where a baby with a shock of dark hair was still crying. Without thinking, he shifted Grace to one arm and picked up the second baby, Faith, according to the small card attached to the bassinet. Somehow, he managed to hold both, and Faith's cries quieted to whimpers. "I couldn't save her," he said quietly, and Kathy had to lean in to hear him over the remaining cries. "My wife. I couldn't save her. I held her hand and watched her fade away, and there was nothing I could do. Mr. Carter, but these babies, they need someone." "Yes, they do, but what would it take?" The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise Kathy. "To adopt them. What would it take?" Kathy stared at him. "One of them? All of them?" The word hung in the air between them like lightning waiting to strike. Kathy's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Mr. Carter, that's impossible. 9 babies. No agency would approve that. You're a single man, you're grieving, you have no experience with children. But what if I did? What if I could prove I could take care of them? It's not just about care. It's about money, space, time. 9 babies need 9 of everything. 9 beds, 9 sets of clothes, 9 educations, and the feeding schedule alone they'd need to eat every 3 hours. You'd never sleep. You'd lose your job. I'd have a reason to wake up in the morning." The words silenced her. Daniel looked down at the 2 babies in his arms, both now peaceful, their eyes drooping with sleep. Behind him, 7 more cried for attention, for love, for someone to tell them they mattered. "This is insane," Kathy whispered. "You know this is insane." "My wife's last words were not to let the love die with her," Daniel said. "To find somewhere for it to go. I've been walking around for 6 months with all this love and nowhere to put it, and it's been eating me alive. But 9 babies with no one to love them." He looked up at Kathy. "That seems like exactly where love should go." Kathy sank into a rocking chair, her face a mixture of admiration and concern. "The director will never approve it. The state will laugh you out of the building. Then I'll keep coming back. I'll volunteer. I'll prove to them I can do it." "Mr. Carter Daniel, you don't understand what you're suggesting. These are 9 human lives, 9 futures, 9 sets of dreams and disappointments and needs and wants. This isn't a project to fill your grief. These are children." Daniel carefully placed Faith back in her bassinet, then Grace. He walked to each of the other 7, looking at each tiny face, memorizing their features. Hope had a birthmark on her left cheek. Mary's hair grew in a perfect swirl. Sarah's nose crinkled when she cried. Rebecca had the longest eyelashes he'd ever seen. Joy, ironically, the loudest crier, had dimples that showed even through her tears. Rose's ears stuck out just slightly, and Elizabeth, the largest of them, had already managed to kick off her blanket 3 times since he'd been in the room. "I know they're children," he said finally. "I know it's insane. I know I'm not qualified or prepared or even fully sane right now. But I also know that tomorrow, these babies will still need someone, and I'll still be walking around with this love that has nowhere to go, so maybe, just maybe, the insane thing is the right thing." Kathy stood studying him, with eyes that had seen too much sadness in this place. "Come back tomorrow, sober, rested, and still feeling this way. If you do, I'll arrange a meeting with the director. I'm not saying she'll agree, she won't, but I'll arrange the meeting." Daniel nodded. He took one last look around the room. 9 babies, 5 now sleeping. Thanks to his brief intervention, 4 still crying for comfort that was stretched too thin. Then he walked out back into the storm that somehow seemed less violent than before. The walk home was different. His feet found their way with purpose, now not wandering, but striding. The rain still fell, but it felt like cleansing rather than punishment. By the time he reached his house, a plan was already forming in his mind. He stood in his living room looking at the space with new eyes. The dining room could hold cribs. The spare bedroom, the one they'd always said would be the nursery, could be converted. His savings, the life insurance money he hadn't touched, it would be enough to start. His job at the factory paid well enough for 1 person, with overtime maybe enough for 10. But first he had something to do. Daniel walked to Anne's chair and sat in it for the first time since she'd died. It felt sacrilegious somehow, but also right. He pulled her unfinished knitting into his lap, a blanket she'd been making for their child, who never came. "I found them, Anne," he whispered to the empty room. 9 babies who need someone. I know it sounds crazy. I know you'd probably tell me to think it through, to be practical. But you also told me not to let the love die with you, and I think this is what you meant. The house was silent, except for the rain against the windows. Daniel picked up the knitting needles. He didn't know how to knit, but Anne had tried to teach him once years ago when they were first married, and thought they had all the time in the world. His fingers were clumsy, the stitches uneven, but he worked through the night, adding row after row to the blanket. By morning, when Martha arrived with another casserole and more concern, she found him there, still in Anne's chair, surrounded by yarn, having added 3 inches to the blanket. His eyes were red but clear, and when he looked up at her, she saw something she hadn't seen in 6 months: purpose. "Martha," he said, I need you to teach me how to knit, and cook for more than one, and possibly how to change a diaper. Daniel, what are you talking about? He smiled, actually smiled for the first time since Anne's funeral. I'm talking about becoming a father. To 9 little girls who need one. Martha dropped the casserole. The dish shattered on the hardwood floor, the floor that was supposed to last forever, sending chicken and noodles in every direction. Martha stood frozen and her mouth open, her hands still positioned as if holding the dish. 9, she finally managed. Did you say 9? Daniel stood setting the knitting aside carefully. He walked to the kitchen, returning with towels and a dustpan. As he cleaned up the mess, he told her everything. The walk in the storm, the orphanage, the babies, the overwhelming certainty that this was what he was meant to do. Martha sank onto the couch, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, concern, and something that might have been fear. Daniel, you're grieving. This is grief talking. You can't adopt 9 babies. Why not? Because it's impossible. Because you're one person. Because... She stopped pressing her hands to her face. Because you'll kill yourself trying, and I can't lose you too. Daniel sat beside her, taking her hands in his. They were shaking. Martha, I'm already dead. I've been dead for 6 months, just walking around in a body that hasn't figured it out yet. Last night holding those babies was the first time I've felt alive since Anne... Don't you dare, Martha interrupted, pulling her hands away. Don't you dare use Anne's death as an excuse for this insanity. It's not an excuse, it's a reason. Anne wanted children more than anything in this world. We spent 15 years and thousands of dollars trying to make it happen. And now there are 9 babies right here in our city who need exactly what we wanted to give. We. You said we. Anne is gone, Daniel. Her body is gone, but her love isn't. I carry it with me every day along with my own. That's enough love for 9 babies. That's enough love for anything. Martha stood pacing to the window. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the morning sun. The playground across the street was already filling with children, their laughter carrying through the glass. Even if the orphanage agreed, which they won't, how would you manage the feeding alone? I've already worked it out. They'll need to eat every 3 hours. If I stagger their feeding times by 20 minutes each, I can create a continuous cycle. One feeds while the next is being burped, while the next is being changed. You've lost your mind. Maybe. Or maybe I've finally found it. Daniel joined her at the window, watching the children play. Martha, I spent 6 months asking God why he took Anne, why he left me here alone. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe he needed Anne elsewhere, but he needed me here for them. Martha turned to look at him, and for the first time she saw what he'd seen in the mirror that morning. Not a broken man trying to fill a void, but a man who'd found his purpose. They'll never let you, she said quietly. A single man, especially adopting girls, especially 9 of them, the system won't allow it. Then I'll change the system. You can't change the system, Daniel. It's been this way for... Watch me. The determination in his voice silenced her. This was the Daniel she remembered from before, the one who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for Anne's treatments, who'd learned medical terminology to understand her diagnosis, who'd fought insurance companies and hospital boards and anyone else who stood between his wife and her care. That Daniel had been dormant for 6 months, but he was back now, and God help anyone who stood in his way. I'll need help, he admitted. Not just from you, but from everyone. The church, the neighborhood, everyone. They'll think you've lost your mind. Let them. But will you help me? Martha was quiet for a long moment, studying her brother's face. She saw Anne there somehow in the set of his jaw, the light in his eyes. Anne would have done this, she realized. If their positions had been reversed, Anne would have walked into that orphanage and claimed those babies without a second thought. "God help me," Martha said. "Yes, I'll help you." Daniel hugged her, then the first real embrace they'd shared since the funeral. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Now," Martha said, wiping her face, "you have an appointment to keep. The orphanage opens in an hour, and you need to shower and shave. You look like a vagrant." While Daniel cleaned up, Martha made phone calls. First to her husband Robert, who responded with predictable disbelief. Then to their pastor, who agreed to provide a character reference despite his reservations. Then to her friend Patricia, who worked for the county and might know someone who knew someone in child services. By the time Daniel emerged clean-shaven and wearing his best suit, Martha had assembled a small army of support. Not everyone believed in the plan, but they believed in Daniel, or at least believed he needed something to live for. Patricia says the state will require a home inspection, background checks, financial statements, psychological evaluations, and about 100 other things, Martha reported. And that's for one child. For 9, they'll probably require an act of Congress. "Then we'll get one," Daniel said, straightening his tie. "Whatever it takes." The walk to St. Mary's was different in daylight. The Gothic towers that had loomed so ominously in the storm now reached toward a clear blue sky. The iron gates stood open, welcoming, and the sound of children playing drifted from somewhere behind the building. Sister Catherine was waiting for him in the entrance hall, looking tired but smiling. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I said I would." People say a lot of things in the middle of the night during storms. Morning light has a way of bringing sanity. "Or clarity," Daniel countered. "Are they awake?" "Always." "Come on, I'll take you to them, then to the director." The nursery was chaos in daylight. 2 other nurses were there now, moving between the bassinets with practiced efficiency, but it was clear they were overwhelmed. 9 babies were simply too many for 3 caregivers. Daniel went straight to Grace's bassinet. She was awake, her dark eyes tracking the mobile above her. When he leaned over, her face changed, not quite a smile. She was too young for that, but a recognition, a settling. "She remembers you," Kathy said, surprised. "That's unusual for a baby this young." Daniel picked her up, and she immediately nestled into his chest. One by one, he visited each baby, holding them briefly, learning their rhythms. Hope liked to be rocked side to side. Faith preferred up and down. Mary calmed to humming. Sarah wanted silence. Rebecca liked her back patted. Joy needed constant motion. Rose wanted to see everything. Elizabeth just wanted to be held tight. "You really are a natural," one of the other nurses said. "Most men are terrified of babies this small." "I spent 6 months being terrified of everything," Daniel replied. "These girls deserve better than fear." A throat cleared behind them. Daniel turned to find a severe-looking woman in a nun's habit, her face lined with years of difficult decisions. "Mr. Carter, I'm Sister Margaret, director of St. Mary's. Sister Catherine has told me about your interest." "It's not interest," Daniel said, still holding Elizabeth. "It's intention." Sister Margaret's eyebrows rose. "I see. Well, perhaps we should discuss this intention in my office." Daniel handed Elizabeth to Kathy and followed Sister Margaret through the orphanage. Her office was small and sparse, dominated by a large crucifix and stacks of paperwork that spoke of too many children and too little funding. "Mr. Carter," she began once they were seated, "I understand you recently lost your wife. 6 months ago. And you have no experience with children. No. No family support. My sister will help. No appropriate housing for 9 children. I'll make it appropriate. Sister Margaret leaned back, studying him. Do you have any idea what you're asking? These aren't puppies, Mr. Carter. These are human beings with complex needs. 9 babies require round-the-clock care. You'd need thousands of dollars just for initial supplies. Formula alone would cost hundreds per month. Medical care, clothing, diapers. I have savings and life insurance money, which will run out faster than you can imagine. And when it does, I'll work overtime. Take a second job if necessary. When would you work these jobs? Babies need constant supervision. 9 babies need... She paused, searching for words. Mr. Carter, what you're proposing is physically impossible for one person. Then I won't be one person. I'll be one person with help. My church, my neighborhood, my family. And when that help dries up, when the novelty wears off and people return to their own lives. Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking of Anne, of her determination, during the worst of her treatments, her refusal to give up even when the doctors had. Sister Margaret, he said finally, I understand your concerns. I know this sounds insane, but I also know that right now those 9 babies are facing a future of separation, foster care, and institutional living. I'm offering them a home, together, as sisters. The state will never approve it. Have you asked them? I don't need to. In my 30 years here, I've never seen anything like what you're proposing approved. Then maybe it's time for something new. Sister Margaret stood moving to the window. From her office, she could see the playground where older children were playing, but her eyes went beyond them to some distant point only she could see. I was young once, she said quietly. Young and idealistic. I thought I could save every child who came through these doors. Reality has a way of tempering such ambitions. I'm not trying to save every child, just 9. She turned back to him. Why these 9? Why not 1? Surely 1 would be more manageable, more reasonable. Daniel thought about it, really considered the question. Because they're already together. Because separating them would be another loss in lives that have already had too much loss. Because... He paused, then continued with complete honesty. Because when I held Grace last night, I felt Anne with me for the first time since she died. And when I held Faith and then the others, it was like pieces of my heart were coming back to life. 9 pieces. 9 chances to do what Anne and I couldn't do together. Sister Margaret returned to her desk, pulling out a thick folder. If, and this is a massive if, I were to even consider supporting this, you'd need to meet impossible standards. Home inspections, financial audits, psychological evaluations, references from every person you've ever met. The state would scrutinize every moment of your life. I understand. You'd need to prove you could physically care for 9 infants. That means demonstrating feeding, changing bathing, medical knowledge. I'll learn. In what? The next week. The state moves fast when it comes to placing babies. These girls could be assigned to families within days. Then I'll learn faster. Sister Margaret stared at him for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She laughed. Not mockingly, but with genuine surprise. You're serious. You're actually serious about this impossible thing. Completely. She pulled out a piece of paper, began writing. This is the name of someone at the state office, Margaret Thompson. She owes me a favor from about 15 years ago. I'm not saying she'll help you, but she'll at least listen. Daniel took the paper like it was made of gold. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You have no idea what you're walking into. The system isn't designed for what you're proposing. You'll face opposition at every level. I faced opposition when I wanted to marry Anne. Her father said I wasn't good enough, that I'd never be able to provide for her properly. I proved him wrong. This is different. No, Daniel interrupted, standing. It's exactly the same. Someone is telling me I can't do something that I know in my soul I'm meant to do. The only difference is, this time I'm not fighting for my future. I'm fighting for theirs. He left Sister Margaret's office with the paper clutched in his hand and went straight to a payphone in the lobby. Margaret Thompson's secretary said she was booked solid for 3 weeks. Daniel said he'd wait in her office until she had 5 minutes. The secretary said that was impossible. Daniel said he'd be there in an hour. The state office building was a maze of bureaucracy, all beige walls and fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. Daniel found Margaret Thompson's office on the 3rd floor, and true to his word, sat in the waiting area. The secretary glared at him. He smiled back and pulled out the knitting Anne had been working on, continuing his clumsy attempts to add rows. "What are you doing?" the secretary finally asked after an hour. "Making a blanket. For my daughters." "Your daughters? 9 of them. They're at St. Mary's right now, but not for long." The secretary stared at him like he'd grown a second head, then disappeared into Margaret Thompson's office. A moment later, she emerged. "Mrs. Thompson will see you for 5 minutes. 5 minutes only." Margaret Thompson was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled into a severe bun. Her office was covered in children's drawings, photographs of successful adoptions, and certificates of appreciation from various child welfare organizations. "Sister Margaret called," she said, without preamble. "She said you're either a saint or insane. I have 5 minutes to figure out which." Daniel set down his knitting. "My wife died 6 months ago, cancer. We tried for 15 years to have children but couldn't. Last night I found 9 babies at St. Mary's who need a parent. I want to be that parent. To one of them. To all of them." Margaret Thompson's expression didn't change. "Impossible. That's what everyone keeps saying. But no one's explained why." "Because the regulations can be waived, amended, or appealed. I looked it up this morning. Title 42, Section 671 of the Social Security Act allows for exceptions in cases of unusual circumstances that serve the best interests of the children." Margaret Thompson leaned back. "You did your homework. I have nothing but time and motivation. Mr. Carter, even if the regulations could be waived, the practical concerns. I have a 4-bedroom house with a large yard, savings of $30,000 plus another $20,000 in life insurance, a stable job at the factory with full benefits. My sister is a registered nurse who lives 3 blocks away. My church has already mobilized a support network. What else do you need? Proof that you won't collapse under the pressure. Proof that you can handle the physical demands. Proof that, give me a week. What? Give me 1 week with the babies, supervised if necessary. Let me prove I can do this." Margaret Thompson was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against her desk. "You know what the foster care system is like for Black children? I've heard." "No, you haven't. Not really. These girls, if they're not adopted immediately, will likely spend their entire childhoods in the system, moved from home to home, separated from each other. Statistics show that Black girls in foster care are 6 times more likely to experience abuse, 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with mental health issues, 8 times more likely to end up homeless. Which is why they need a stable home with a white father. Do you have any idea the challenges that would create?" Daniel thought of Anne, of how she'd faced every challenge with grace and determination. I know it won't be easy, but easier than the alternative you just described. I think so. Margaret Thompson stood, walked to her window. Outside, the city sprawled in all directions, full of children who needed homes, and homes that needed children, but somehow the two rarely matched up the way they should. Sister Catherine seems to think you have something special. She said the babies responded to you unusually well. They just need someone to respond to. 1 week, Margaret Thompson said suddenly, turning around. I'll give you 1 week, tomorrow, but not unsupervised. You'll have to pass a background check first and a basic psychological evaluation. If you can do that by tomorrow, you can start Monday. 7 days, Mr. Carter. 7 days to prove you can care for 9 infants. If you succeed, and you won't, I'll consider beginning the formal adoption process. Daniel stood extending his hand. Thank you. She shook it reluctantly. Don't thank me. I'm giving you just enough rope to hang yourself. When you fail, and you will fail, these girls will be placed in appropriate homes with appropriate families. And if I don't fail, then you'll have accomplished something I've never seen in 23 years in child welfare. But Mr. Carter, she returned to her desk, already pulling out forms. I've never seen it because it's impossible. Daniel left her office with a stack of paperwork and a heart full of determination. The secretary watched him go, shaking her head. But as he waited for the elevator, he heard her on the phone. Patricia, you're not going to believe what just happened. Word spread faster than Daniel could have imagined. By the time he got home, Martha was already there with 3 women from church cleaning and organizing. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, appeared with a box of baby supplies her daughter had outgrown. The mailman, having somehow heard the news, offered his teenage daughter as a babysitter. This is insane, Martha kept saying, even as she directed traffic. Completely insane. But she was smiling. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Daniel barely slept, transforming his house into something resembling a nursery ward. The dining room table disappeared beneath towers of diapers that Mrs. Chen's daughter kept delivering. Apparently, she'd called every mother in a 5-mile radius. The spare bedroom became command central, with 9 cribs arranged in a horseshoe pattern that would allow him to move efficiently between them. Martha arrived Saturday morning with a van full of supplies and her husband Robert, who looked like he'd been dragged there against his will. This is insanity, Robert said for the 5th time, carrying in a box of formula. Daniel, you're going to kill yourself trying to do this. Then I'll die trying to do something that matters, Daniel replied, testing the sturdiness of each crib. Better than dying of grief in an empty house. Robert set down the box harder than necessary. Is that what this is about? Some kind of elaborate suicide? Robert, Martha snapped, but Daniel raised his hand. No, it's okay. He should ask. Daniel turned to his brother-in-law. 6 months ago, yes, maybe I wanted to die. Every morning I woke up disappointed that I hadn't died in my sleep. But Thursday night, holding those babies, I remembered what it felt like to be needed, to have purpose. So no, Robert, this isn't about dying. It's about finally living again. Robert was quiet for a moment, then picked up another box. Where do you want the bottle sterilizer? By Sunday evening, the house was ready, or as ready as it could be. Daniel had practiced diaper changes on dolls borrowed from the church nursery until his fingers could work the tabs in his sleep. Martha had walked him through feeding positions, burping techniques, and the signs of common infant ailments. The pastor had come by to pray over the house, bringing with him a dozen volunteers who'd signed up for shifts throughout the week. You know, the entire congregation thinks you've lost your mind, the pastor said quietly as he was leaving. Have I? Daniel asked. The pastor looked at the transformed house, at the charts Martha had made showing feeding schedules, at Daniel himself, alive in a way he hadn't been since Anne's diagnosis. "Maybe," the pastor said, "but sometimes God uses our broken minds to do his whole work." Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather wanted to mark the occasion with appropriate drama. Daniel stood in his newly converted nursery, checking everything for the 100th time. 9 cribs, 9 changing stations, 9 sets of everything a baby could need. The feeding chair, a rocking recliner wide enough to hold multiple babies, sat in the center like a throne. Margaret Thompson arrived at 7 sharp, accompanied by a younger woman with a clipboard and a skeptical expression. "This is Jennifer Walsh, a social worker who'll be observing this week," Margaret said, surveying the room. "She'll document everything, and I do mean everything. Every feeding, every change, every cry that goes unanswered for more than 3 minutes." 3 minutes? Daniel asked. "That's the standard for institutional care. If you're going to do this, you need to exceed institutional standards, not just meet them." Jennifer pulled out a stopwatch. "I'll be timing responses." "Then we'd better get started," Daniel said. "When do the babies arrive?" "They're downstairs," Margaret said. "Sister Catherine and her team are bringing them up. Last chance to back out, Mr. Carter. No one would blame you for recognizing this is impossible." "With respect, Mrs. Thompson, you've been telling me it's impossible for 4 days. I'm starting to think that word doesn't mean what you think it means." The sound came first, multiple babies beginning to fuss as they were moved. Then Sister Catherine appeared, pushing a special transport cart with 3 bassinets. Behind her, 2 other nurses had similar carts. 9 babies about to become his responsibility. "Morning, Mr. Carter," Sister Catherine said warmly. "The girls are eager to see their new home." Daniel approached the first cart, looking down at Grace, Faith, and Hope. Grace was awake, her dark eyes finding his immediately. She made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like recognition. "Hello, sweetheart," he whispered. "Welcome home." Jennifer's pen was already moving across her clipboard. The transfer took an hour. Each baby had to be properly documented, their medical information, reviewed, their immediate needs assessed. Daniel tried to focus on the nurse's instructions, but his attention kept drifting to the babies themselves. They seemed so small in their new cribs, dwarfed by the space he'd created for them. "They'll need to eat soon," Sister Catherine said, checking her watch. "We fed them at 5 this morning, but—" A cry interrupted her. Elizabeth, the largest and loudest, had decided she was hungry now. Within seconds, Joy joined her, then rose, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of 9 unhappy babies. Jennifer clicked her stopwatch. Daniel didn't panic. He'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. He went to Elizabeth first, the loudest needed attention to prevent the others from escalating. He picked her up, grabbed a prepared bottle from the warmer, and settled into the feeding chair. Then carefully, he reached for Joy with his free arm. "You can't feed 2 at once safely," Jennifer said. "That's against page 47 of the Infant Care Guidelines." Daniel interrupted, adjusting his hold to the approved tandem position. 2 babies can be safely fed simultaneously if the caregiver maintains proper support and observation of both infants. Martha appeared in the doorway. "I've got Rose," she said, scooping up the crying baby. Mrs. Chen was right behind her. "I'll take Faith." One by one, his support system materialized. Robert with Hope, the pastor's wife with Mary, 3 church volunteers with Sarah, Rebecca, and Grace. Within 2 minutes and 37 seconds, Daniel could see Jennifer's stopwatch. Every baby was being fed. "This is cheating," Jennifer protested. "He's supposed to do this alone." No, Margaret Thompson corrected quietly. He's supposed to ensure the babies are cared for. How he accomplishes that is up to him. The first feeding was chaos, but organized chaos. Daniel had created a chart showing each baby's feeding amount schedule and preferences. As each baby finished, they were burped, changed if necessary, and placed back in their crib. The entire process took 45 minutes. "Now they sleep?" Robert asked, hopefully collapsing into a chair. Daniel laughed. "For about an hour if we're lucky. Then we do it all again." "Every 3 hours," Martha added. 24 hours a day." Robert's face paled. "How is one person supposed to—" "I'm not one person," Daniel said, looking around the room at his helpers. "I haven't been since Thursday night." The morning progressed in cycles. Feed, burp, change, comfort, clean, prepare, feed again. Jennifer's clipboard filled with notes. Margaret Thompson said nothing, just observed. The babies, for their part, seemed to be testing him. Grace was peaceful, rarely crying. Joy was anything but joyful, fussing constantly. Elizabeth wanted to eat every 2 hours instead of 3. Hope spit up on everything. Faith had decided she only liked being held facing outward. Mary would only sleep if someone was humming. Sarah startled at every sound. Rebecca had already mastered the art of removing her socks. Rose had discovered her voice and seemed determined to use it constantly. By noon, Daniel's volunteers were exhausted, but Daniel himself seemed energized. He moved between the babies with increasing confidence, learning their rhythms, their sounds, their needs. He could tell by the pitch of Joy's cry whether she was hungry or tired. He knew that Sarah needed her blanket tucked tight, while Rebecca couldn't stand being confined. "You're a quick study," Sister Catherine said, preparing to leave. "Most people take weeks to learn what you've figured out in hours." "I don't have weeks," Daniel replied, changing Hope's diaper with one hand while holding a bottle for Elizabeth with the other. "They need me to know now." The afternoon brought new challenges. 3 babies decided to have dirty diapers simultaneously. Joy developed hiccups that made her scream. Rose refused her 2 o'clock feeding entirely, then wanted double at 3. Through it all, Jennifer's stopwatch clicked and her pen scratched. At 4 o'clock, just as Daniel was starting to feel the exhaustion, Grace began to cry. Not her normal gentle fuss, but a sharp, pained wail that made everyone in the room freeze. "What's wrong?" Martha asked, hovering as Daniel picked up the baby. Grace's face was red, her little body rigid with discomfort. Daniel checked her diaper clean. Tried feeding her, she turned away. Checked for hair wrapped around fingers or toes, nothing. Jennifer's stopwatch was running. 2 minutes. 2.5. "Come on, sweetheart," Daniel whispered, walking with Grace, bouncing gently. "Tell me what's wrong." 3 minutes. Jennifer made a mark on her clipboard. Daniel felt panic rising but pushed it down. He thought about Anne, how she'd always known instinctively what someone needed. She'd had a gift for reading people, for understanding pain that couldn't be voiced. He held Grace up, looking into her scrunched face, and then he saw it, a tiny red mark on her neck, where the tag from her onesie was rubbing. Such a small thing, but to a baby's sensitive skin, it must have felt like sandpaper. Quickly, he laid her on the changing table, carefully removed the onesie, and turned it inside out, then put it back on with the tag on the outside. Grace's cries immediately softened to whimpers, then stopped entirely. 4 minutes and 13 seconds total, according to Jennifer's stopwatch. But the crisis was resolved. "How did you know to look for that?" Jennifer asked, and for the first time she sounded curious rather than skeptical. "My wife had sensitive skin," Daniel said quietly, settling Grace back in her crib. "Tags always bothered her. She cut them out of everything." The afternoon wore on. More feeds, more changes, more moments of controlled chaos. By 5 o'clock, Daniel's volunteers were starting to leave, returning to their own families and responsibilities. Martha stayed, as did Mrs. Chen, but the house grew quieter as the sun began to set. "This is when it gets real," Margaret Thompson said, speaking for the first time in hours. "Nighttime. When you're alone with 9 babies and no one to help." "I'll manage," Daniel said, though his confidence was wavering slightly. The exhaustion was starting to hit. He'd been up since 4 that morning preparing. "We'll see," Margaret said. She turned to Jennifer. "You'll stay for the night shift." "Until midnight," Jennifer confirmed. "Then Sandra takes over until 6. Margaret left with a final warning. "Remember, Mr. Carter, this is day 1 of 7. It only gets harder from here." As if on cue, Elizabeth began to cry. Then Joy. Then all 9 babies seemed to realize it was dinner time. Daniel looked at Martha, who was already reaching for a baby, then at Mrs. Chen, who grabbed 2 bottles from the warmer. "We've got this," Martha said firmly. "We've got this." The evening feeding was smoother than the morning. They were learning to work as a team. But Daniel could see the exhaustion in Martha's eyes, the way Mrs. Chen's hands shook slightly as she burped Rebecca. "You should both go home," he said, as they finished the 7 o'clock feeding. "Get some rest." "Absolutely not," Martha said. "I'm staying tonight." "Martha, you have your own family." "Robert understands. I packed a bag. I'll sleep on the couch between feedings." Mrs. Chen also refused to leave. "My husband is playing poker tonight anyway. I'd rather be here." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you both." "Then don't," Martha said briskly. "Just focus on proving everyone wrong." The 10 o'clock feeding was rough. The babies were overtired, fighting sleep fussy in that way that only exhausted infants can be. Joy screamed through her entire bottle. Hope wouldn't burp and then spit up everywhere. Sarah had blown out her diaper in spectacular fashion, requiring a complete change of crib sheets. Jennifer watched it all, making notes. At one point, when Daniel was trying to comfort Joy, while Martha changed, Sarah and Mrs. Chen walked with a fussy Rose, Jennifer asked, "Why are you doing this?" Daniel looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She was young, maybe 25, with earnest eyes behind thick glasses. "Because they need someone to do it," he said simply. "But why you? Why all 9? Daniel thought about it, bouncing Joy gently. Her cries were starting to soften. "Did you ever lose someone you loved?" Jennifer nodded slowly. "My mother. 2 years ago." "Then you know how love doesn't die with the person. It just sits there inside you with nowhere to go. These babies, they're somewhere for my love to go. All 9 of them, because that's how much love I have left to give." Jennifer was quiet for a moment, then made another note. But Daniel noticed she'd stopped timing everything with her stopwatch. By midnight, when Sandra arrived to take over the observation, all 9 babies were miraculously asleep. Daniel stood in the center of the room, swaying slightly with exhaustion, watching them breathe. 9 tiny chests rising and falling. 9 perfect faces relaxed in sleep. 9 futures resting in cribs he'd assembled with his own hands. "You should sleep," Martha whispered. "They'll be up again in 2 hours. Daniel nodded, but didn't move. "Anne would have loved this," he said softly. "The chaos, the challenge, all of it. She would have been amazing at it." "She is amazing at it," Martha said, putting her arm around him. "Through you." The 1 a.m. feeding came too soon. Daniel forced himself up from the couch where he'd collapsed, his body protesting. Several babies were already stirring. Grace, as always, was patient, but Elizabeth was working up to a full wail. This time it was just him and Martha. Mrs. Chen had finally gone home. 2 adults, 9 babies. The math was impossible, but somehow they managed. Daniel had developed a system: feed the loudest first to prevent full meltdown, then work through the others in order of fussiness. Martha took 3, he took 3, then they tag-teamed the remaining 3. Sandra watched from the corner, making occasional notes, but seeming less intense than Jennifer. When Joy had a particularly explosive diaper that required a full bath at 2 in the morning, Sandra actually helped holding the baby while Daniel prepared the small tub. "You're doing better than I expected," she admitted as Daniel carefully washed Joy, who had decided she loved bath time and was cooing happily. "Most people would have given up by now." "Most people don't have 9 reasons not to give up," Daniel replied, lifting Joy from the water and wrapping her in a towel. She looked up at him with wide eyes, and for a moment Daniel could swear she smiled. Not gas, not reflex, but a real smile. "Did you see that?" he asked Sandra excitedly. "Babies don't smile that young," Sandra said automatically, but she was leaning in, watching. Joy did it again, a definite, deliberate smile. "She knows me," Daniel said wonderingly. "She knows I'm her." He stopped, not sure he had the right to say the word yet. "Her father," Sandra finished for him. "Yes, I think she does." The 4 a.m. feeding was the hardest yet. Daniel's exhaustion was bone deep, his movements sluggish. Martha had fallen asleep in the rocking chair with Faith in her arms. Sandra had to wake her, concerned about safety. The babies seemed to sense the adults' fatigue and were extra fussy. Rose wouldn't eat. Rebecca wouldn't stop eating. Mary had developed a cough that worried everyone until Sandra listened with a stethoscope and declared it just congestion. "She might need a humidifier," Sandra suggested. Daniel added it to the growing list of things he needed. The life insurance money was disappearing faster than he'd anticipated. Formula diapers, clothes, medical supplies, the costs were staggering. But he pushed the worry aside. One problem at a time. By 5:30, as dawn light began creeping through the windows, Daniel felt like he'd run a marathon. His arms ached from holding babies, his back screamed from bending over cribs, his eyes burned with exhaustion, but all 9 babies were alive, fed clean, and mostly content. Jennifer returned at 6 to relieve Sandra, looking fresh and professional, with her coffee and clean clothes. She looked at Daniel, rumpled, unshaven, with what was definitely spit up on his shirt, and something in her expression softened. "You survived the night," she said. "Night 1 of 7, Daniel reminded her. 6 more to go." The morning brought reinforcements. Robert arrived with breakfast sandwiches and took over with Hope and Faith. Mrs. Chen returned with her daughter Lisa, who immediately fell in love with Rose. 3 church ladies appeared with casseroles for later and stayed to help with the 7 o'clock feeding. But Daniel noticed something: the babies were starting to look for him specifically. When Elizabeth cried, she would calm faster in his arms than anyone else's. Grace would turn her head when she heard his voice. Even Joy, perpetually fussy, Joy seemed to settle when he was the one walking with her. "They're bonding with you," Jennifer observed, making notes. "That's unusual for such a short time." "Maybe they know," Daniel said, changing Sarah's diaper with practiced efficiency. "Maybe they can sense when someone's not going to leave." The second day blurred into the third. Daniel developed a rhythm, a dance between babies that looked chaotic from the outside but had its own logic. He learned to prep bottles one-handed while burping a baby. He could change a diaper in under a minute. He knew which cry meant hunger, which meant tiredness, which meant, "I just want to be held." Margaret Thompson returned on Wednesday, ostensibly to check on things, but really Daniel suspected to see him fail. Instead, she found him simultaneously feeding Elizabeth and Hope while using his foot to rock Rebecca's bouncy seat and humming to keep Mary calm. "This is insane," she muttered, but there was admiration in her voice. "That's what everyone keeps saying," Daniel replied, shifting Elizabeth to burp her. "But it's working. For now, you've had constant help. What happens when everyone goes back to their lives?" It was a fair question, and one that haunted Daniel during the 2 a.m. feedings, when it was just him and whichever volunteer had stayed that night. The church ladies couldn't keep coming forever. Martha had her own family. Mrs. Chen was 73 years old, but every time doubt crept in, one of the babies would do something, Grace's little hand wrapping around his finger. Faith's contented sigh after a feeding, joy actually being joyful for 5 minutes, and his determination would renew. Thursday brought a crisis. Mary's cough had worsened, and her temperature spiked to 101. Jennifer immediately called for a medical evaluation as per protocol. The pediatrician who arrived looked at the setup, 9 babies in one room, 1 primary caregiver, and shook his head. "This is a recipe for disaster," he told Margaret Thompson, who had accompanied him. "If one gets sick, they'll all get sick." "So far, only Mary shows symptoms," Daniel pointed out, holding the sick baby carefully. She was listless, her usual alertness dimmed. "So far," the doctor emphasized. "Mr. Carter, I admire what you're trying to do, but 9 infants in such close quarters would be the same as in an orphanage ward," Daniel interrupted, "or a hospital nursery. The only difference is they're getting more individual attention here." The doctor prescribed antibiotics for Mary and warned that any sign of illness in the others should trigger immediate separation. Daniel spent the rest of Thursday night checking temperatures, listening to breathing, watching for any sign that the illness was spreading. It didn't. By Friday morning, Mary's fever had broken, and none of the other babies showed symptoms. Daniel had gotten exactly 3 hours of sleep in the past 48 hours, but he felt victorious. "You're running on adrenaline," Martha warned, watching him prepare the 9 o'clock feeding. "When you crash—" "I won't crash until after they're mine," Daniel said firmly. "Legally, permanently mine." Friday afternoon, Jennifer pulled him aside. "My report is due Monday," she said. "Margaret will make her decision based on what I write." Daniel's heart raced. "And what will you write?" Jennifer looked around the room. Robert was feeding Rebecca. Mrs. Chen was rocking Hope. 2 church volunteers were changing Faith and Sarah. In the center of it all, Daniel held Grace and Elizabeth, one in each arm, swaying gently as they fell asleep. "I'll write the truth," Jennifer said. "That what you're doing should be impossible but somehow isn't. That these babies are receiving better care here than they would in most foster homes. That you've created not just a home but a community around them." Daniel felt tears threatening. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Margaret still has to approve it, and then the state board, and then a judge. You've won a battle, Mr. Carter, but the war is just beginning." Saturday came with exhaustion so complete that Daniel found himself sleeping, standing up, swaying with a baby in his arms. Martha forced him to lie down for 2 hours while she and Mrs. Chen handled the afternoon feeding. He woke to the sound of laughter, multiple babies making happy sounds, while his volunteers played with them. "Listen to that," Mrs. Chen said when she saw him. "They're happy. 9 babies who were abandoned, and they're happy." That evening, as Daniel prepared for his last night of the trial week, neighbors began stopping by. Word had spread through the community about what he was attempting. They brought food supplies and offers of help. Mr. Johnson from 2 doors down, a retired pediatric nurse, volunteered for night shifts. The teenage twins from across the street asked if they could earn money babysitting. Even cranky Mr. Peterson, who complained about everything, appeared with a case of formula. "Don't know why you're doing this," he grumbled. "But if you're gonna do it, might as well do it right." The final night was almost anticlimactic. Daniel had his system down. The babies had settled into their routine. His volunteers knew their roles. When Margaret Thompson arrived Sunday morning with Jennifer and 2 other officials, she found a functioning household. "This doesn't look like the home of a man who's been caring for 9 infants for a week," one of the officials said suspiciously. "That's because I haven't been doing it alone," Daniel said, gesturing to the half-dozen volunteers already there for the morning feeding. "These babies aren't just mine, they belong to this entire community now." Margaret walked through the room checking each baby. They were all clean, well-fed, and alert. Grace reached for her when she leaned over the crib. Joy actually lived up to her name, gurgling happily. Elizabeth had gained 3 ounces. The medical records showed perfect care, every feeding documented, every diaper logged, every temperature recorded. "Mr. Carter," Margaret said finally, "what you've accomplished this week shouldn't have been possible." Daniel's heart sank at the word shouldn't. "However," she continued, and his heart leaped, "impossible seems to be your specialty. I'm recommending approval for foster care placement, with the intention to adopt pending final state review." The room erupted. Martha actually screamed. Mrs. Chen started crying. Robert slapped Daniel on the back so hard, he nearly dropped the bottle he was holding. Through it all, the babies watched with wide eyes, as if they understood that something momentous had just happened. "Don't celebrate too much," Margaret warned. "You're now officially a foster father to 9 infants. The adoption process could take a year or more. Any sign that you can't handle it, any indication that the babies aren't thriving, and they'll be removed." "They'll thrive," Daniel said confidently. "They already are." Margaret gathered her papers to leave, then paused at the door. "Mr. Carter, I've been in child welfare for 23 years. I've seen every kind of family you can imagine. But this," she gestured around the room, "this is something new. These girls are lucky to have you." "No," Daniel corrected, looking at each baby in turn. "I'm lucky to have them." As the officials left and the volunteers celebrated, Daniel stood in the middle of his controlled chaos, thinking of Anne. She would have loved this moment, not because he'd proven everyone wrong, but because 9 little girls who'd started with nothing now had everything: a home, a family, and a father who would move heaven and earth to keep them safe. The sun streamed through the windows, casting light on 9 small faces that had already become his entire world. Grace made her soft cooing sound. Faith stretched her tiny arms. Hope yawned. Mary coughed once, then settled. Sarah blinked slowly. Rebecca kicked her feet. Joy smiled, definitely smiled. Rose found her voice and babbled. Elizabeth, the strongest and most determined, looked directly at him with eyes that seemed to say, "We knew you could do it." "We did it, girls," Daniel whispered. "Week 1 down. Just a lifetime to go." The celebration was short-lived. That very afternoon, as volunteers cleaned up from lunch and the babies napped, Daniel heard a sharp knock at the door. He opened it to find a severe-looking woman in an expensive suit holding a leather briefcase. "Mr. Carter, I'm Eleanor Whitman from Child Protective Services. We've received a complaint." Daniel's blood ran cold. Behind Eleanor stood 2 police officers and another social worker. "A complaint from whom?" "That's confidential. But we've been informed that you're attempting to raise 9 infants in unsafe conditions. We need to inspect the premises immediately." Martha appeared beside Daniel, her face flushed with anger. Unsafe. We just passed a week-long evaluation. That was through the state adoption agency, Eleanor said, pushing past them into the house. CPS has its own standards. Officers, please ensure Mr. Carter doesn't interfere with our inspection. What followed was 2 hours of humiliation. Eleanor examined every corner of the house, taking photographs, making notes. She questioned the ventilation in the nursery, the proximity of the cribs, the single bathroom that would need to serve 11 people. She photographed every stain on the carpet, every crack in the walls. 9 babies generate a tremendous amount of waste, she said, inspecting the diaper disposal system. The health hazards alone. We follow strict sanitation protocols, Daniel Provostin. Everything is cleaned and disinfected multiple times daily. Eleanor ignored him, moving to the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator, counting formula bottles. This is insufficient for 9 infants. What's your backup plan when you run out? We restock every 2 days, Mrs. Chen goes to. So you're relying on a neighbor for essential supplies. Eleanor made another note. What happens when this neighbor is unavailable? The babies began waking from their naps, their cries adding to the chaos. Daniel moved to tend to them, but one of the officers blocked his path. Ma'am, the children need attention, the officer said uncomfortably. Eleanor nodded curtly. Let him proceed. I want to observe his methods. Daniel felt like a specimen under a microscope as he moved through the feeding routine. His hands shook slightly as he prepared bottles, acutely aware of Eleanor watching and documenting every move. Grace picked up on his anxiety and began crying harder than usual. Joy, true to form, escalated to screaming. Soon all 9 babies were in various states of distress. This is chaos, Eleanor announced, as if she'd proven a point. One man cannot possibly. He's not one man. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, with 3 church ladies behind her. We're all part of this. Eleanor turned her sharp gaze on the elderly woman. And you are Susan Chen. I live next door. These are Dorothy Patterson, Lucille Banks, and Harriet Foster from First Methodist Church. We're part of Mr. Carter's support system. Volunteers, Eleanor said dismissively. Untrained, unvetted volunteers with access to vulnerable infants. We've all raised children, Dorothy said indignantly. I've got 6 kids and 14 grandchildren. But no formal training in infant care, no background checks, no official oversight. Eleanor turned back to Daniel. Mr. Carter, I'll be filing my report with recommendations for immediate removal of these children. The room went silent except for the baby's cries. Daniel felt the world tilt. After everything, after proving himself for a week, it was going to end like this. On what grounds? Martha demanded. Insufficient resources, inadequate facilities, unvetted caregivers, and general chaos that puts these infants at risk. Eleanor snapped her briefcase shut. The children will be removed Monday morning. I suggest you prepare them. She left with her entourage, leaving Daniel standing in the middle of his nursery, surrounded by crying babies and stunned volunteers. He sank into the rocking chair, pulling Grace against his chest. She immediately calmed her tiny hand, gripping his shirt. We're not letting this happen, Martha said fiercely. We'll fight it. But Daniel barely heard her. He was looking at Grace, at her trusting eyes, thinking about how he'd promised these girls stability, and was about to fail, just like everyone else had. That evening, word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By 7 o'clock, Daniel's living room was packed with angry neighbors and church members. The pastor stood on a chair to be seen over the crowd. This is persecution, he declared. A good man trying to do God's work, and the system wants to stop him. It's because he's white and they're black, someone called out. If it were the other way around, That's not helpful, the pastor interrupted. What matters is these babies need Daniel and Daniel needs them, so what are we going to do about it? Robert, who'd been silent until now, stood up. My cousin's a lawyer, family law. I'll call him tonight. I know a reporter at the Chronicle, Mrs. Chen added. Maybe some media attention would help. My daughter works at City Hall, another neighbor offered. She might know who to contact. Plans formed rapidly. They would document everything, every feeding, every diaper change, every moment of care. They would get letters of support from every professional who'd interacted with Daniel and the babies. They would make it politically impossible for CPS to remove the children. But Daniel sat silent through it all, holding whichever baby needed comfort. He was thinking of Anne, of her fierce protectiveness, when she thought someone was being treated unfairly. She would have fought this with everything she had, but she would have been smart about it. We need to know who filed the complaint, he said suddenly, interrupting a heated discussion about organizing a protest. The room quieted. Martha looked at him. They said it's confidential. Everything leaves a trail, Daniel said. Someone didn't want me to have these babies. Someone who knew about the placement, who knew to call CPS, specifically who knew exactly what concerns to raise. He stood handing Grace to Dorothy. Robert, call your cousin, but ask him about something else too. Ask him about adoption lawyers who might benefit from these babies being placed elsewhere. Robert's eyes widened. You think this is about money? 9 healthy infants, that's 9 adoption fees. 9 sets of desperate parents willing to pay anything. Someone stands to profit if I fail. The room erupted in angry voices, but Daniel raised his hand for silence. A cry had started from the nursery. Elizabeth, he could tell by the pitch. He went to her, picking her up and walking back to the living room. Look at her, he said, holding Elizabeth so everyone could see her face. Look at all of them. They're beautiful, healthy babies who just needed someone to say yes. And somewhere out there, someone wants to split them up and sell them to the highest bidder. That's a serious accusation, the pastor said carefully. It's a serious situation, Daniel replied. And I'm going to prove it. The weekend became a war campaign. Robert's cousin James arrived Saturday morning with a stack of law books and immediately began building a case. He interviewed every volunteer, documented every receipt for baby supplies, photographed the immaculate nursery from every angle. Eleanor Whitman, he said, looking up from his laptop. She's been with CPS for 3 years. Before that, she worked for a private adoption agency called Bright Beginnings. That's not unusual, Martha pointed out. People move between public and private sectors. Maybe, James said. But Bright Beginnings is owned by Margaret Whitman, Eleanor's sister. The room went quiet. Daniel felt a cold fury building in his chest. So she removes babies from my care, and they end up at her sister's agency. We can't prove that yet, James warned. But it's suspicious. I'm going to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chen had contacted her reporter friend, who arrived with a photographer. The subsequent article would run with the headline, Community Rallies Around Single Father of 9, featuring a photo of Daniel feeding 3 babies simultaneously while volunteers tended the others. By Sunday evening, they had 47 letters of support, including one from Sister Margaret at St. Mary's that particularly touched Daniel. In my 30 years of working with abandoned children, I have never seen such immediate and complete devotion as Mr. Carter has shown these 9 girls. To remove them from his care would be an act of cruelty, both to him and to them. Even Margaret Thompson from the state agency wrote a letter, though hers was more measured. While Mr. Carter's situation is highly unusual, our week-long evaluation showed that the infants are thriving under his care with appropriate community support. Any decision to remove them should not be taken lightly. But the most powerful support came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the pediatrician, who'd treated Mary's fever, arrived Sunday night with a thick folder. "I've been thinking about this all weekend," she said. "I was skeptical at first, but I've reviewed the medical records. These babies have gained appropriate weight, met all developmental milestones, and shown remarkable stability considering their backgrounds. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Carter, it's working." She opened her folder, revealing detailed medical charts. "I've documented everything. Their health before placement versus now. The improvement is undeniable. If CPS removes these children, I'll testify that it would be medically detrimental." Daniel felt tears threatening. "Why would you do this for us?" Dr. Hoffman looked toward the nursery, where soft baby sounds drifted out. "Because I took an oath to do no harm. Separating these sisters now, when they've just found stability, that would be harm." Monday morning arrived gray and ominous. Daniel had been up all night with the babies, but adrenaline kept him alert. By 8 o'clock, his house was fuller than ever. Neighbors lined the front walk. Church members packed the living room. James, the lawyer, stood ready with his briefcase. The reporter was back this time with a news van. At exactly 9 o'clock, Eleanor Whitman arrived with a larger entourage, 4 social workers, 3 police officers, and a woman with cold eyes who introduced herself as the director of CPS. "Quite a circus, Mr. Carter," the director said, surveying the crowd. "But this won't change anything. We have a court order." James stepped forward. "May I see it?" The director handed him a document. James read quickly, then smiled. "This order is for the removal of children from an unsafe environment. However, I have here sworn affidavits from 14 witnesses, medical documentation, and a preliminary injunction from Judge Harrison preventing any action until a full hearing can be held." Eleanor's face went white. "You can't—" "Actually, we can," James interrupted. "Furthermore, we've discovered some interesting connections between you, Ms. Whitman, and certain private adoption agencies. I think the judge will be very interested in those connections." The director looked between Eleanor and James. "What connections? Should I tell her, or would you like to, Eleanor?" James asked pleasantly. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The director's eyes narrowed. "Eleanor, what is he talking about?" Before Eleanor could answer, a commotion arose from the nursery. Joy was crying, not her usual fussy cry, but something more urgent. Daniel pushed past the officials and they followed him. In the nursery, they found Dorothy trying to comfort Joy, who was clearly in distress. But what made everyone stop was the scene around her. 8 other babies, all awake, all turned toward Joy's crib as if they knew their sister was upset. "Look at that," Dr. Hoffman said softly, having arrived moments before. "They're bonded. They know each other." Daniel picked up Joy, and she immediately calmed. Then one by one the other babies settled too, as if his comfort of one reassured them all. "This is remarkable," one of Eleanor's accompanying social workers said. "I've never seen infant bonding like this." The director was studying the scene, her expression thoughtful. She walked slowly around the room, observing the setup, the cleanliness, the organization. She stopped at the feeding chart Martha had created, examined the medical records Dr. Hoffman had posted, looked at the volunteer schedule that stretched 3 months into the future. "Mr. Carter," she said finally, "how many hours of sleep have you had in the past week?" "Maybe 20 total," Daniel admitted. "And yet you're standing here functional with 9 healthy babies." She turned to Eleanor. "You and I need to have a conversation, privately, now." They left the room. Through the window, Daniel could see them in the front yard, the director's gestures becoming increasingly animated, while Eleanor seemed to shrink. After 10 minutes, Eleanor walked to her car and drove away. The director returned alone. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I apologize for this disruption. Your case has been flagged for review, but not removal. Eleanor Whitman has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into potential conflicts of interest." The room erupted in cheers, but the director raised her hand for silence. "However, you need to understand that raising 9 children, especially as a single parent, will be under constant scrutiny. Any sign of failure, any indication that these children aren't receiving proper care, and we will intervene." "Understood," Daniel said, shifting Joy to one arm and reaching for Faith with the other. "But with respect, ma'am, these aren't just children anymore. They're my daughters." The director's expression softened slightly. "Not legally. Not yet." "The law will catch up," Daniel said confidently. "It always does when love leads the way." After the officials left and the crowd dispersed, Daniel stood in his nursery with just Martha and Mrs. Chen. The babies were all peaceful, fed, and content after the morning's drama. "You know this isn't over," Martha said quietly. "Eleanor Whitman won't give up easily." "Let her come," Daniel said, exhaustion finally hitting him. "We've got truth on our side." Mrs. Chen, ever practical, was already preparing bottles for the next feeding. "Truth is good," she said, "but lawyers are better. We should keep James close." Over the next month, life settled into a rhythm that would have seemed impossible to anyone who hadn't lived it. Daniel quit his factory job. The overnight shifts were incompatible with the baby's needs, and took a day position at a lower pay. The financial strain was immediate and severe, but the community stepped up. The church organized a monthly fundraiser. Neighbors dropped off formula and diapers. Local businesses, riding the wave of positive publicity from the newspaper articles, donated supplies. But it was the nights that tested Daniel most. Even with volunteers taking shifts, he was the one the babies wanted when they were truly distressed. Grace, so easy during the day, had night terrors that only his voice could calm. Elizabeth was cutting her first tooth and wanted to be held constantly. Joy had decided that 3 a.m. was party time. One particularly difficult night in late May, Daniel found himself walking the hallway with 3 babies, Hope in a front carrier, Faith in his left arm, Rebecca in his right, while the others cried in their cribs. It was the kind of moment that would have broken him before, but now he just kept walking, humming the lullaby Anne used to sing when she couldn't sleep during chemo. "You'd think this was crazy," he said aloud, as he often did when talking to Anne. 9 babies, Daniel, really. But you'd do it too. You'd love them just as fiercely." Faith made a small sound almost like agreement, and Daniel laughed. At 4 months old, the girls were starting to show real personality. Grace was thoughtful, studying everything with serious eyes. Faith was a cuddler, always wanting contact. Hope was the comedian, finding everything amusing. Mary had become the mother hen, fussing if the others cried. Sarah was shy, hiding her face from strangers. Rebecca was determined, already trying to roll over. Joy was still Joy, mercurial and demanding. Rose had found her voice and narrated everything in baby babble. And Elizabeth was clearly going to be the leader, strong-willed and confident. 9 daughters, Daniel said to his reflection in the hallway mirror. He looked haggard. He had lost 15 pounds and aged 5 years in 2 months, but his eyes were alive in a way they hadn't been since Anne's diagnosis. "I have 9 daughters." The legal process ground on slowly. There were hearings and home visits, psychological evaluations, and financial audits. Eleanor Whitman had indeed not given up. She'd hired a lawyer and was challenging the adoption on grounds that a single man couldn't possibly provide adequate care for 9 female infants. "She's arguing that they need a mother figure," James explained during one of their strategy sessions, "that growing up without female influence will harm them." Daniel gestured around the room where Martha, Mrs. Chen, Dorothy, and 3 other women were tending various babies. No female influence. I know, but legally these are volunteers, not parents. It was Mrs. Chen who provided the solution, though she didn't mean to. During a particularly chaotic feeding, she said, "This would be easier if we all lived here." Daniel stopped mid-bottle. "What did you say?" "I said it would be easier if—" She paused, seeing his expression. "Daniel, no." "Why not? You're widowed, living alone in that big house. Martha, you and Robert are struggling with your mortgage. Dorothy, you're always saying your apartment is too quiet." "You want us to move in?" Martha asked incredulously. "Not permanently. But what if we created a sort of communal living situation just until the adoption is final? It would solve the supervision issue, the female influence argument, and honestly, we'd all get more sleep." What started as a crazy idea became reality within 2 weeks. Mrs. Chen moved into the master bedroom. Daniel had been sleeping on the couch anyway. Martha and Robert took the basement apartment. Dorothy, whose lease was up anyway, took the guest room. The house transformed from a single-family home into something between a commune and an extended family compound. The babies thrived with the constant attention. There was always someone available for feeding, changing, comforting. The women developed specialties. Martha handled medical issues. Mrs. Chen managed supplies and scheduling. Dorothy became the sleep training expert. Robert, initially reluctant, discovered he had a gift for making babies laugh and became the designated entertainer. But the arrangement drew new scrutiny. Eleanor's lawyer argued that the unconventional living situation was unstable and inappropriate. The state seemed unsure how to classify it. Some days Daniel felt like he was winning. Other days he was certain the girls would be taken away. The breaking point came in July. Daniel had been running on adrenaline and determination for 4 months, and his body finally rebelled. He collapsed during the morning feeding, simply crumpling to the floor, with Rose in his arms. Dorothy caught the baby, but Daniel didn't get up. He woke in the hospital with Martha beside his bed, and a doctor explaining about exhaustion, dehydration, and stress. All he could think about were the babies. "They're fine," Martha assured him. "Mrs. Chen has everything under control. But Daniel, you can't keep this up. You're killing yourself." "Better than letting them down," he mumbled. "You think dying would help them? You think leaving them would be better than asking for more help?" The doctor interrupted. "Mr. Carter, you need at least a week of rest. Your body is shutting down. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. Your kidney function is compromised, and frankly, you're showing signs of severe burnout." "A week?" Daniel tried to sit up. "I can't leave them for a week." "You can and you will," Martha said firmly. "Because if you don't rest now, you'll leave them forever." It was Anne's voice he heard then, not literally, but in memory from when she'd forced him to take breaks during her illness. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Daniel." So he rested, though it nearly killed him to be away. Martha brought daily reports and photos. The babies were fine, thriving even. Mrs. Chen had implemented a new schedule that was actually more efficient. Dorothy had finally gotten Joy on a proper sleep schedule. Robert had taught Elizabeth to hold her own bottle. On day 3, James visited with unexpected news. "Eleanor Whitman is under federal investigation. Turns out she's been taking kickbacks from her sister's adoption agency for years. Every baby she removed from unsafe situations ended up at Bright Beginnings, which charged prospective parents up to $50,000 per placement." Daniel felt sick. How many families did she destroy? They're reviewing 5 years of cases. But here's the important part: with Eleanor, disgraced CPS is backing off your case. They're recommending approval for adoption. Daniel should have felt victorious, but all he felt was tired. When Cho, final hearing is in 2 weeks. Can you hold on that long? 2 weeks. After 4 months of fighting, 2 more weeks seemed both eternal and insignificant. He returned home to a hero's welcome. The babies all seemed to recognize him, brightening when they heard his voice reaching for him with chubby arms. Elizabeth actually cried when he picked her up, as if angry he'd been gone. Grace just stared at him solemnly, then grabbed his finger and wouldn't let go. "They missed you," Mrs. Chen said. "We all did. The house felt wrong without you." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Letters of recommendation poured in from unexpected sources: the mailman, the grocery store clerk, who'd watched Daniel buy industrial quantities of formula, even cranky Mr. Peterson, who wrote simply, "The man's crazy, but those babies are lucky to have him." The final hearing was on a Tuesday. Daniel dressed his girls in matching outfits that Dorothy had sewn little yellow dresses with white flowers. He wore his only suit, the one he'd worn to Anne's funeral, but this time it felt like armor rather than a shroud. The courthouse was packed. It seemed like half the neighborhood had come to support him. The judge, an elderly woman with kind eyes, looked overwhelmed by the crowd. "This is highly unusual," she began. "Mr. Carter, you're asking this court to approve the adoption of 9 infants by a single parent. Help me understand why I should do something that has never been done before in this state." Daniel stood Elizabeth in his arms because she'd been fussy all morning. "Your Honor, 6 months ago, my wife died. Her last words to me were not to let love die with her. These girls had no one. I had love with nowhere to go. It seemed like a perfect match." "Love isn't always enough," the judge said gently. "Children need stability, resources, education." "Which they have," James interrupted, standing. "If I may. Your Honor, we've prepared documentation showing Mr. Carter's support system, financial planning, and educational savings already established for each child." The judge reviewed the papers, occasionally looking up at the crowd of supporters. "This living arrangement, multiple adults in one household, how sustainable is that?" Mrs. Chen stood. "Your Honor, I'm 73 years old. I've lived alone since my husband died 5 years ago. Living with Daniel and the girls has given me purpose again. I'm not going anywhere." Martha stood next. "Robert and I couldn't have children of our own. These girls are the closest we'll ever have to daughters. We're committed for the long haul." One by one, supporters stood and testified. The pastor about the church's commitment, Dr. Hoffman about the baby's health, Sister Catherine about the bond between the girls and Daniel. Even Margaret Thompson, who'd initially been skeptical, spoke about how Daniel had achieved the impossible. But it was Grace who sealed the decision. As the judge was speaking, the baby, now 6 months old, reached out from Dorothy's arms toward Daniel, saying clearly, "Dada." The courtroom went silent. It was her first word. Then Faith, as if not to be outdone, also reached for him. "Dada." One by one, with the mysterious synchronicity they'd always shared, each baby turned toward Daniel. They couldn't all say the word yet, but their intent was clear. They knew who their father was. The judge watched this display with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Carter, in my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many families, traditional, non-traditional, and everything in between. What matters isn't the structure, but the love. And it's clear these children love you and you love them." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "However, this is still highly unusual. I'm going to approve the adoption with conditions. Monthly check-ins for the first year. Continued documentation of the support system. And Mr. Carter, you must maintain your own health. These girls need you for the long haul." Yes, Your Honor. Daniel managed through his tears. Then it is the decision of this court that the 9 minor children known as Grace, Faith, Hope, Mary, Sarah, Rebecca, Joy, Rose, and Elizabeth Carter are hereby legally adopted by Daniel James Carter. Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You're officially a father. The courtroom erupted. Daniel was mobbed by well-wishers, but all he could focus on were his daughters being passed to him one by one until he held as many as his arms could manage while the others pressed close in the arms of his chosen family. "We did it, Anne," he whispered. "We have our family." That evening, the house was quiet for once. The babies were sleeping, exhausted from the excitement. The adults sat in the living room, emotionally drained but peaceful. Daniel looked around at these people who'd become his family, Martha and Robert, Mrs. Chen Dorothy, and the rotating cast of volunteers who'd become aunts and uncles to his girls. "You know what Anne would say right now?" Martha asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Daniel smiled. "That we're all crazy." "No," Martha said, pulling out something from behind her back. It was Anne's unfinished knitting, the blanket she'd been making for the baby they never had. But it wasn't unfinished anymore. Martha had completed it and added to it, making it large enough to cover all 9 cribs if they were pushed together. "She'd say that love multiplies when you divide it among those who need it," Martha continued. "And that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into." Daniel took the blanket, running his fingers over Anne's stitches and then Martha's additions. It was imperfect with dropped stitches and uneven tension, but it was beautiful in its imperfection, just like their unconventional family. As if sensing a moment happening, Grace woke first, then the others in sequence. Soon all 9 babies were awake, but not crying, just making soft sounds. Daniel spread the blanket on the floor, and one by one they placed the babies on it. The girls immediately turned toward each other, tiny hands reaching out, touching, connecting. "Look at them," Mrs. Chen said wonderingly. 9 souls who found each other against all odds." 10 souls, Daniel corrected, sitting down among his daughters. "They found me, too." Or maybe he thought, looking at Anne's stitches in the blanket that now covered his children, it was 11 souls all along. Because somehow in the chaos of bottles and diapers, in the sleepless nights and small victories in the fight against bureaucracy and prejudice, Anne's love had lived on. It had multiplied and spread, creating something beautiful out of loss. The first winter came harder than anyone expected. By November, all 9 girls were crawling, and the house had transformed into a maze of baby gates and cushioned corners. Daniel had thought the infant stage was exhausting, but 9 mobile babies brought challenges he'd never imagined. They moved like a tiny army, with Elizabeth always leading the charge toward whatever they shouldn't touch. It was during the first snowstorm that the heating system failed. Daniel woke at 2 in the morning to Rose's crying and realized the house was freezing. Within minutes, all 9 girls were awake and distressed, their little bodies shivering, despite their warm pajamas. "We need to get them warm," Martha said, already gathering blankets while Robert fumbled with the thermostat. "This isn't working. The furnace is completely dead." Mrs. Chen appeared with armfuls of her own blankets from next door. "Bring them all into the living room. We'll make a nest by the fireplace." They worked quickly, creating a massive bed of blankets and pillows near the fireplace that Daniel had rarely used since Anne's death. As he built the fire, he remembered Anne insisting they needed a house with a real fireplace. "For Christmas mornings with our children," she'd said. Now here he was arranging 9 babies in a semicircle around the hearth, while snow pounded against the windows. Grace curled against Faith, who reached for Hope, who grabbed Mary's hand, creating a chain of connected sisters. Joy, for once, wasn't crying, but watching the flames with wide-eyed wonder. "We can't afford a new furnace," Daniel said quietly to Martha as they settled in for the night. taking shifts to keep the fire burning and watch the babies. The savings are gone. I've been putting groceries on credit cards. Martha was silent for a moment. We'll figure it out. We always do. But Daniel could hear the worry in her voice. The financial reality was crushing. 9 babies needed formula diapers, clothes they outgrew, monthly medical care for ear infections and colds that spread like wildfire through the group. His day job barely covered the mortgage. The community support helped, but people had their own families, their own struggles. The next morning, Mr. Peterson appeared at the door with his grown son. "Heard your furnace died," he said gruffly. "My boy's a heating contractor. He'll take a look." Peterson's son spent 3 hours in the basement, then emerged shaking his head. "It's shot. Needs full replacement. We're talking $8,000 minimum." Daniel felt his chest tighten. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million. "Do it," Mr. Peterson said. Everyone turned to stare at him. The cranky neighbor who complained about everything, who'd called the police once about noise from the babies, stood there in his worn cardigan, looking uncomfortable. "I said do it," he repeated. "I'll cover it." "Mr. Peterson, I can't," Daniel began. "You're not. I'm investing. In them." He pointed at the babies who were now crawling around the living room like puppies. Elizabeth had pulled herself up on his leg and was gumming his pants. "My wife and I couldn't have kids. She died last year, left me insurance money I don't need. She would have loved this chaos. So fix the damn furnace before those girls freeze." He left before Daniel could properly thank him, but Elizabeth kept his pants leg clenched in her tiny fist until he gently extracted himself, patting her head awkwardly before escaping. The furnace was replaced within 2 days, but the incident opened Daniel's eyes to how precarious their situation was. One crisis could topple everything. He started working overtime, then picked up weekend shifts at a grocery store. He'd leave the house at 5 in the morning and return at 10 at night, exhausted beyond measure. The girls noticed his absence. Grace became clingy when he was home, refusing to let him out of her sight. Joy's tantrums intensified. Even easygoing Hope seemed anxious, crying whenever he put on his coat. "You're going to collapse again," Dr. Hoffman warned during the girls' 9-month checkup. "Your blood pressure is elevated, you've lost more weight, and frankly, you look terrible." "I look like a father of 9. Daniel tried to joke, but it fell flat. "You look like a man destroying himself. These girls need you present, not just providing." But how could he be present when being present didn't pay the bills? It was Martha who found the solution, though it came from an unexpected source. She'd been contacted by a documentary filmmaker who'd heard about their story. "Absolutely not," Daniel said immediately. "We're not putting the girls on display." "Hear her out," Martha insisted. "She's not looking for exploitation. She wants to document a year in our lives. The real story, not the sensationalized version." The filmmaker, a young woman named Jessica, came to dinner. She sat on the floor while the girls crawled over her, played with her equipment bag, and generally created chaos. Joy managed to delete something important from her phone. Rebecca spit up on her expensive camera bag. Through it all, Jessica just laughed. "This is what I want to show," she said. "Not the miracle story everyone wants to spin, but the reality. The exhaustion, the financial struggle, the community coming together. The way these girls are growing up as true sisters despite not sharing blood." "What's in it for you?" Daniel asked bluntly. "A real story. And hopefully a film that changes how people think about family." She paused. "There's also a $50,000 payment for participation, plus any additional funds raised through the documentary's exhibition." $50,000. Daniel looked at his daughters, then at the stack of overdue bills on the counter, then back at Jessica. No faces shown without permission for each instance. No filming during private moments. And I get final say on what's included. Deal, Jessica said immediately. The filming began in January when the girls were 10 months old. Jessica was unobtrusive, often just setting up cameras and letting them run while life happened around them. She captured the morning chaos of 9 babies demanding breakfast simultaneously, the afternoon disasters of synchronized diaper explosions, the evening miracle of bedtime stories with Daniel surrounded by 9 sets of eager eyes. But she also captured the harder moments. Daniel falling asleep standing up during a night feeding. Martha crying in the kitchen after Rebecca fell and needed stitches, blaming herself for not watching closely enough. Mrs. Chen's arthritis flaring, making it hard for her to lift the girls. Dorothy's daughter calling to say she couldn't visit because she didn't approve of the unconventional arrangement. "Why are you filming this?" Daniel asked one particularly bad day, when 3 girls had the flu and he'd been vomited on 4 times before noon. "Because it's real," Jessica said, helping him clean up. "Everyone wants the Instagram version of family. But this mess, this exhaustion, this determination, this is what love actually looks like." The documentary funds helped immediately. Daniel paid off the credit cards, caught up on bills, and even managed to start small college funds for each girl. But more importantly, the act of being filmed forced them to articulate why they were doing this. "Tell me about Grace," Jessica would say, and Daniel would describe how Grace studied everything with those serious eyes, how she was the first to walk at 11 months, how she'd toddle over to comfort any sister who was crying. "What about Faith?" And he'd explain how Faith had become the family clown, making faces that sent her sisters into giggles, how she'd learned to share first, always offering her toys to others. Through these interviews, Daniel realized he wasn't just raising 9 babies. He was raising 9 individuals, each with their own personality, needs, and dreams. The first birthday celebration was a community event. The church hall was decorated with handmade banners, each girl's name spelled out in glittering letters. The news came to cover it, the Miller 9 turn 1, though Daniel had started using Anne's maiden name Miller for the girls to give them some anonymity. Each girl had her own small cake, which resulted in magnificent chaos. Joy smashed hers immediately. Rose delicately picked at the frosting. Elizabeth tried to eat everyone else's. Grace studied hers like a science experiment. Faith shared hers with whoever was nearest. Hope laughed at the mess. Mary cried because she got frosting in her hair. Sarah hid her face when everyone sang. Rebecca fell asleep in hers. "1 down, 17 to go," Robert said, surveying the destruction. But Daniel wasn't thinking about the years ahead. He was watching his daughters, his beautiful, chaotic, perfect daughters, and remembering Anne's words about love finding somewhere to go. That night, after everyone had gone home and the girls were asleep, Daniel found himself in the nursery, though it could hardly be called that anymore. 9 toddler beds now replaced the cribs, arranged in the same horseshoe pattern. He stood in the center, listening to them breathe, and talked to Anne as he often did. They're walking now. Running, really. Elizabeth thinks she's in charge. Joy is still loud. Grace watches everything like you used to, like she's memorizing the world. I wish you could see them. A small voice interrupted him. "Dada." It was Sarah standing in her crib, reaching for him. He picked her up and she nestled against his chest. Within minutes, others were awake. They always seemed to sense when one was up. Soon he had all 9 gathered around him on the floor, some drowsy, some alert, all seeking comfort. "Story?" Hope asked. She'd been the first to string together sentences. Daniel reached for the worn book of fairy tales Anne had bought years ago when they first started trying for children. But instead of reading, he found himself telling them about Anne, about how she loved butterflies and always stopped to watch them, how she could make anyone laugh even on their worst days, how she would have loved each of them fiercely and uniquely. "Mama Anne," Grace said solemnly, and the others repeated it in their baby voices. "Mama Anne." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. They'd never known her, but somehow they knew her. Through him, through the stories, through the love that had survived her death and multiplied ninefold. Spring brought new challenges. The girls were fully mobile now, and keeping track of 9 toddlers was like herding cats. They needed a bigger yard, safer spaces, more room to grow. The house that had seemed so large was now bursting at the seams. "We could move," Martha suggested one evening after they'd spent an hour searching for Rebecca, who'd figured out how to hide in the kitchen cabinets. "With what money, and where would we go that would be better?" Daniel was at the kitchen table surrounded by bills and preschool applications. The logistics of everything multiplied by 9 was overwhelming. "Actually," Jessica said, looking up from reviewing footage, "I might have an answer to that." She'd been approached by a production company wanting to expand the documentary into a series. "They're offering significant funding, enough to renovate the house properly, hire some regular help, ensure the girls have everything they need." Daniel's immediate instinct was to say no, but then he looked through the doorway at his daughters playing in the living room. Elizabeth was building a tower while Grace knocked it down. Faith was dancing to music only she could hear. Joy was definitely eating something she shouldn't be. What would it entail? Cameras in the common areas, regular filming schedules, following the girls through milestones. But Daniel, you'd have complete control. Any footage you're uncomfortable with gets cut. Mrs. Chen spoke up from where she was preparing dinner. "Pride is expensive when you have 9 daughters to raise." She was right. Within a month, the renovation began. The basement was converted into a playroom. The backyard was fenced and filled with equipment. Each girl would eventually get her own small space while still sharing rooms, teaching both independence and togetherness. But fame, even minor fame, brought unexpected challenges. The story went viral online and suddenly everyone had opinions. Some called Daniel a saint. Others questioned his motives. Some praised the integrated family he'd created. Others criticized a white man raising black daughters. The hardest criticism came from an unexpected source. A black social worker named Vanessa Williams requested a meeting, saying she had concerns about the girls' cultural identity. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, professional, but clearly skeptical. The girls were napping, and the house was unusually quiet. "Mr. Carter," she began, "I don't question your love for these children, but love isn't enough when it comes to raising black daughters in America. What are you doing to connect them to their culture, their heritage?" Daniel felt defensive but tried to stay open. "We're doing our best. We read books with black characters, celebrate Black History Month." "That's surface level," Vanessa interrupted. "These girls will face challenges you can't fully understand. They'll be the only black faces in white spaces, the only adopted kids in rooms full of biological families. They need more than token representation." She was right, and Daniel knew it. He'd been so focused on keeping them fed, healthy, and loved that he hadn't thought deeply enough about what they'd need as they grew. "Will you help us?" he asked, surprising himself and her. Vanessa studied him for a long moment. "You really want to do right by them, more than anything." She became a regular presence in their lives, introducing the girls to music, food, and traditions that connected them to the broader black community. She helped Daniel find a more diverse church to attend. She connected them with other adoptive families navigating similar dynamics. Most importantly, she helped him understand that raising these girls meant acknowledging both what he could give them and what he couldn't. "You can love them completely," she said one day watching the girls play, "but you also need to prepare them for a world that won't always love them back." The series premiered when the girls were 18 months old. Daniel watched nervously as their lives were broadcast to millions. But Jessica had kept her promise. It was honest but respectful, showing both the beautiful chaos and the genuine love. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from viewers touched by the story. Offers of help came from around the world. But more importantly, other unconventional families reached out, sharing their own stories of finding love in unexpected places. One letter particularly moved Daniel. It was from a grandmother in Georgia raising her 5 grandchildren alone. "I thought I was drowning," she wrote. "But seeing you manage 9 babies made me realize I could handle 5 kids. Thank you for showing that families come in all shapes." The girls, oblivious to their fame, continued growing and developing. By age 2, their personalities were fully distinct. Grace was the intellectual, always carrying a book, even though she couldn't read yet. Faith was the athlete, climbing anything vertical. Hope was the artist, covering every available surface with crayon. Mary was the caretaker, always checking on her sisters. Sarah was the quiet one, observing before acting. Rebecca was the explorer, constantly discovering new ways to escape any containment. Joy had finally lived up to her name, becoming the family entertainer. Rose was the talker, narrating everything in a stream of consciousness. And Elizabeth was definitely the leader, organizing her sisters like a tiny general. "They're not babies anymore," Dorothy said wistfully one evening, watching them play an elaborate game only they understood the rules to. "No," Daniel agreed. "They're becoming people, their own people." But that night, when storms rolled through and thunder shook the house, they were babies again. All 9 ended up in Daniel's bed, clinging to him and each other. As he lay there, surrounded by his daughters, he thought about the journey from that first night at St. Mary's to now. The financial struggles continued, though the series helped. The exhaustion was bone deep and permanent. The criticism from strangers who thought they knew better never stopped. The logistics of 9 children in a world designed for nuclear families remained overwhelming. But then Grace would read him a story she'd memorized, getting the voices just right. Faith would score a goal in toddler soccer and look for him on the sidelines. Hope would present him with a drawing of their family stick figures holding hands all different sizes but clearly together. Mary would kiss a scraped knee, better mimicking his care. Sarah would whisper, "Love you, Dada," at bedtime. Rebecca would discover something new and drag him to see it. Joy would perform an elaborate dance just to make him laugh. Rose would narrate his every move like a sports commentator. Elizabeth would organize her sisters for a group hug that nearly knocked him over. In those moments, every struggle felt worth it. The second birthday party was even bigger than the first. Media coverage had made the Miller 9 minor celebrities, and the church hall overflowed with well-wishers. But Daniel made sure to create a private moment too, gathering his daughters in their backyard as the sun set. 2 years ago, he told them, though they were too young to fully understand, "You were 9 tiny babies with no one. I was a broken man with nothing to live for. But together we became a family. Not a normal family maybe, but our family." "Our family," Joy shouted, and the others took up the chant. "Our family, our family." Mrs. Chen, watching from the porch, with Martha and Dorothy, wiped her eyes. "Anne would be so proud," she said softly. "She is proud," Martha corrected. "Wherever she is, she's watching this chaos and laughing." That night, after the parties and the cake and the inevitable meltdowns that came with overtired toddlers, Daniel sat in the living room writing in the journal he'd started keeping for the girls. One day, they'd want to know their story, all of it. "Year 2 complete," he wrote. "You're walking, talking, developing personalities that astound me daily. Grace, you read to your sisters every night. Faith, you've learned to climb out of your crib and into your sisters' cribs to comfort them. Hope, your drawings cover our refrigerator and most walls. Mary, you make sure everyone has their stuffed animal before bed. Sarah, you notice everything and forget nothing. Rebecca, you've discovered every hiding spot in this house. Joy, you've started making up songs about everything. Rose, you talk from morning to night, and I love every word. Elizabeth, you line up your sisters for everything. Meals, baths, story time like a tiny drill sergeant. You're growing so fast, and sometimes I panic that I'm not enough. That one father, even with all our help, can't give 9 daughters everything they need. But then I watch you together, the way you look out for each other, comfort each other, play, and fight, and forgive like only sisters can. And I realize that maybe the greatest gift I've given you is each other." Today, a reporter asked me if I ever regret taking on so much. I told her the truth. My only regret is that Anne isn't here to see you. But sometimes, when you all laugh at the same time, or when you pile on me for a group hug, or when you hold hands walking through the park like a chain of ducklings, I swear I can feel her. In your joy, in your love for each other, in the chaos that would have delighted her, she's there. So no, I don't regret a single moment. Not the sleepless nights or the financial stress or the judgment from strangers. Because you 9 have given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Purpose, joy, and a love that multiplies every day. Happy 2nd birthday, my beautiful daughters. Here's to a lifetime of chaos together. He closed the journal and checked on them one last time. 9 toddler beds, 9 sleeping faces, 9 futures full of possibility. The house was quiet except for their breathing and the occasional sleep mumble from Rose, who talked even in her dreams. Daniel stood in the doorway, remembering that first night when he'd thought taking care of 9 babies was impossible. It had been impossible. But they'd done it anyway, all of them together, him, Martha, Robert, Mrs. Chen, Dorothy, the church, the neighborhood, and the girls themselves. "Thank you, Anne," he whispered to the darkness. "Thank you for telling me not to let the love die. It didn't die. It grew into something beautiful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges." 3 of the girls had developed a fear of baths. Joy had learned to open the child-proof locks. Elizabeth had started organizing her sisters into coordinated mischief. The terrible 2s times 9 was going to be an adventure. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. 9 daughters sleeping safely, surrounded by love that had transcended death and multiplied beyond anything Daniel could have imagined. The family that shouldn't exist, but did, held together by choice and determination, and the kind of love that moves mountains, or at least moves 9 babies from abandonment to belonging. The terrible 2s became the terrifying 3s, and by the time the girls turned 4, Daniel had aged what felt like a decade. It was a humid August morning when the real test of their family began. Daniel woke to find Elizabeth standing by his bed, her face serious in the dawn light. "Daddy Joy won't wake up." The words sent ice through his veins. He ran to the girls' room where Joy lay in her bed burning with fever, her breathing labored and strange. The other girls stood in a circle around her bed, holding hands instinctively, as if their connection could protect their sister. "Martha," Daniel shouted, scooping Joy into his arms. She was limp, too hot, making small whimpering sounds that tore at his heart. "Call 911. The ambulance ride was a blur. Joy's temperature had spiked to 104, and she was barely conscious. Daniel held her small hand, while the paramedics worked whispering prayers he hadn't said since Anne's final days. At the hospital, they whisked Joy away, leaving Daniel in a waiting room that felt too familiar, too much like the rooms where he'd waited for news about Anne. Martha arrived with Mrs. Chen, having left the other girls with Dorothy and Robert. What did they say? Nothing yet. They're running tests. Daniel's voice was hollow. She was fine yesterday. She was dancing, singing that song about butterflies she made up. 3 hours passed before Dr. Martinez, a young pediatrician with kind eyes, came to find them. Mr. Carter, Joy has bacterial meningitis. We've started aggressive antibiotic treatment, but the next 24 hours are critical. The world tilted. Daniel had researched childhood illnesses obsessively, knowing that 9 children meant 9 times the risk. Meningitis was one of his greatest fears, fast, dangerous, potentially fatal, or causing permanent damage. Can I see her? Of course, but you'll need to suit up. We're taking every precaution. Joy looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and IVs. Her usually animated face was still her skin ashen. Daniel sat beside her, taking her hand carefully. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered. "Daddy's here. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay, because your sisters need you. I need you." The next hours stretched endlessly. Daniel refused to leave Joy's side even when Martha brought him food he couldn't eat. Messages poured in from the community prayers, offers of help, questions about the other girls. Jessica, the documentary filmmaker, called, offering to pause filming indefinitely. "Document this," Daniel told her with surprising firmness. "This is part of our story too. The fear, the waiting, the way crisis reveals what really matters." By evening, the other 8 girls were demanding to see Joy. The hospital had strict policies, but Dr. Martinez, who'd been following their story, made an exception. 5 minutes, she said, and everyone must wear masks. Watching his daughters file into the hospital room, Daniel's heart broke and mended simultaneously. Elizabeth, the leader, went first, touching Joy's hand gently. "Wake up, Joy. You're being too quiet. It's weird." Grace had brought one of her picture books. "I'll read to her. She always likes stories." Faith climbed partially onto the bed before Martha caught her. "I want to hug her better." Hope had drawn a picture, 9 stick figures holding hands with "Get Well, Joy" written in shaky letters. She taped it where Joy would see it when she woke. Mary, ever the caretaker, tried to adjust Joy's blanket. Sarah stood quietly observing everything with those watchful eyes. Rebecca had smuggled in Joy's favorite stuffed elephant, placing it carefully beside her sister. Rose, for once, was silent, her usual chatter replaced by worried observation. "We should sing," Hope suggested. Joy loves singing. And there, in that sterile hospital room, 8 little girls sang their sister's butterfly song, their voices thin but determined. Joy's eyes fluttered, not quite waking, but responding. The monitors showed her heart rate stabilizing, her breathing becoming less labored. "She hears you," Dr. Martinez said softly, checking the readings. "Keep talking to her." They stayed until Joy's eyes finally opened, unfocused but aware. She looked at each sister, then at Daniel, and whispered one word: "Home. Soon, baby." Daniel promised, tears streaming down his face. "Soon." Joy spent a week in the hospital. The other girls were tested, all negative, a miracle given their constant proximity. The community rallied, creating care schedules so Daniel could stay with Joy while the others were looked after. The documentary crew captured it all: the fear, the exhaustion, the moment Joy finally laughed again, when Rose performed an elaborate interpretive dance about pudding. but the illness had changed things. Daniel realized how fragile their ecosystem was, how one crisis could topple everything. He'd been running on love and adrenaline for 4 years, but what happened when that wasn't enough? The answer came from an unexpected source. A foundation that had been following their story reached out with a proposal. They wanted to create the Miller 9 Fund, a trust that would ensure the girls' education and medical needs were met through college. "Why would you do this?" Daniel asked the foundation's director, a woman named Patricia, whose own daughter had died of meningitis years earlier. "Because every child deserves security," Patricia said simply. "And because what you've built here, this family, it's worth protecting." The fund changed everything. Daniel could cut back to one job, spending more time with the girls. They could afford better health insurance, regular checkups, tutors when needed. But more than money, it provided peace of mind. Fall arrived with the challenge of preschool. Finding one school willing to take all 9 girls had been impossible, so they'd split into 3 groups at different schools. The first day was chaos. Faith cried and clung to Daniel's leg. Rebecca tried to escape 3 times. Joy, still recovering, was quieter than usual, staying close to Grace. But Elizabeth, ever the leader, marched into her classroom and announced, "I'm Elizabeth Miller and I have 8 sisters. We're famous." The teacher, Mrs. Brooks, hid a smile. "Well, Elizabeth Miller with 8 sisters, would you like to show them where to hang their backpacks?" Within a month, the girls had adapted. Grace was already reading at a first-grade level. Faith became the playground champion. Hope's artwork covered the classroom walls. Mary organized the other children like a tiny teacher. Sarah finally began talking more to people outside the family. Rebecca discovered a love for building blocks. Joy regained her voice literally and figuratively, becoming the class songbird. Rose talked so much her teacher had to create special, quiet times just for her. Elizabeth organized her entire class into a complex social hierarchy, with her naturally at the top. But success brought new challenges. Other parents complained about the attention the Miller 9 received. Some accused Daniel of exploitation, saying the documentary was damaging. Others questioned whether one man could properly raise 9 girls, especially as they approached adolescence. The criticism peaked when a parent named Richard Stevenson confronted Daniel at pickup time. "It's not natural," he said loudly, ensuring others heard. "These girls need a mother figure, not some grief-stricken man and his band of volunteers." Before Daniel could respond, a small voice piped up. "He is our mother figure." It was Sarah, usually so quiet, standing with her hands on her hips. "Daddy does everything. He braids our hair and makes our lunches and reads us stories and kisses our owies. So maybe you need to be quiet now." Richard Stevenson turned red as other parents tried not to laugh. Mrs. Chen, who'd come for pickup, added sweetly, "From what I hear, Mr. Stevenson, you've never even been to a parent-teacher conference. Perhaps focus on your own parenting before criticizing others." That evening, Daniel found Sarah sitting alone on the porch steps. "Thank you for defending me today." Sarah leaned against him. "That man was mean and wrong. You do everything mommies and daddies do. Sometimes I worry it's not enough, that you girls are missing out." "Missing out on what?" Sarah asked with 4-year-old wisdom. "We have you and Aunt Martha and Grandma Chen and Aunt Dorothy and everyone. That's more family than most kids have." She was right. Their unconventional family had evolved into something powerful. Martha and Robert had officially moved into the basement apartment. Mrs. Chen, despite her age, remained sharp and involved. Dorothy had become the homework supervisor. The church community provided a network of aunts and uncles. Even Mr. Peterson had become Grandpa Pete, teaching the girls to tend his vegetable garden. Winter brought its own drama. The city announced plans to build a highway extension that would demolish their block. The house where everything had begun, where Anne had lived, where the girls had grown from infants to children, was under threat. Daniel stood at a city council meeting, his 9 daughters lined up beside him in matching dresses Dorothy had made. "This isn't just about property values or urban planning," he said into the microphone. "This is about community. This block, these houses, they're where neighbors become family, where 9 abandoned babies found a home, where love multiplied despite loss." Grace stepped forward, reading from a paper in her careful handwriting. "Our house is special. It's where Daddy found us, where Mama Ann's spirit lives, where Grandma Chen teaches us to cook, where Grandpa Pete shows us vegetables. Please don't take our home." The other girls each spoke their voices small but determined. Faith talked about their backyard swing, Hope about the wall where she drew her first mural, Mary about the kitchen where they all gathered, Rebecca about her hiding spots. Rose gave a lengthy dissertation about why their house was the best house that went on until Elizabeth gently pulled her away. Joy sang a song she'd written about home. The council was visibly moved, but bureaucracy was bureaucracy. The vote was scheduled for next month. Daniel left feeling defeated, but the girls were energized. They'd found their voices. "We should fight," Elizabeth declared in the car, "like in the movies." "How do we fight City Hall?" Daniel asked, though he was already thinking the same thing. "We get everyone to help," Mary suggested. "All our friends from school, from church, from everywhere." What followed was a grassroots campaign that would have made professional organizers proud. The girls created flyers with Hope's artwork. Grace wrote letters to newspapers. Faith and Rebecca went door to door with Martha collecting signatures. Joy performed her home song at local venues. Rose talked to literally everyone about saving their block. Sarah, in her quiet way, took photographs of all the neighbors together, creating a visual story of community. Elizabeth coordinated everything with the efficiency of a tiny general. Even 4-year-old Mary organized her preschool class to make signs. Jessica captured it all, creating a special episode about the fight to save their home. It aired nationally, and suddenly their local fight became a national story. Letters of support poured in. A prominent developer offered to fund legal challenges. The story went viral on social media with #SaveTheMiller9Home. The second city council meeting was packed. The highway extension had become a symbol of community versus bureaucracy. When the vote was called, it wasn't even close. The project was rejected, the neighborhood saved. That night, the block threw a party. Mr. Peterson actually smiled. The church ladies cooked enough food for an army. Children ran through the streets that would remain theirs. And at the center of it all, 9 little girls danced with their father, their family, their community. "You did this, Mom," Daniel told his daughters as they prepared for bed. "You saved our home." "We all did," Elizabeth corrected. "That's what family does." Spring arrived with kindergarten preparations. The thought of his babies starting real school terrified Daniel more than he cared to admit. They'd need uniforms, supplies, schedules. The logistics alone were staggering, but it was the emotional aspect that kept him awake. "They're growing up too fast," he told Anne's picture one night. The girls were asleep, the house quiet, except for Rose's sleep-talking and Joy's gentle snoring. "I blink, and they're bigger. Grace is reading chapter books. Faith can climb anything. Hope's artwork is getting recognition from actual artists. Mary mothers everyone, including me. Sarah sees everything, understands more than she should. Rebecca's curiosity is insatiable. Joy's recovery made her fearless. Rose talks like she's 30. And Elizabeth. God, Elizabeth, is you. Determined, bossy, protective of everyone. A small cough made him turn. Grace stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Can't sleep, baby. She climbed into his lap. I had a dream about Mama Ann. Daniel's breath caught. You did? She was pretty like in the pictures. She said to tell you something. Grace yawned, settling against his chest. She said the love didn't die. It turned into us. Tears ran down Daniel's face as Grace fell asleep in his arms. Whether it was a dream or something more, the message was clear. Ann's love lived on in these 9 girls who called him Daddy, who fought City Hall at age 4, who held each other through illness and triumph alike. The kindergarten question resolved itself when St. Catherine's Academy, a private school known for excellence, offered all 9 girls full scholarships. The principal's sister Margaret, ironically, the same woman who'd initially doubted Daniel at St. Mary's, had followed their story. I was wrong about you, Mr. Carter, she admitted during their meeting. These girls are extraordinary, and that's because of the family you've built. St. Catherine's would be honored to have them. The first day of kindergarten was documented by what seemed like half the media in the state. 9 girls in matching uniforms but carrying different backpacks. Grace with books. Faith with a soccer ball, Charm, Hope with paint-splattered canvas. Mary with a first aid kit, toy. Sarah with a camera. Rebecca with a compass. Joy with musical notes, Rose with a microphone pin, Elizabeth with a whistle. Daniel walked them to their classroom. The school had agreed to keep them together for kindergarten, and watched them settle into their seats. They automatically arranged themselves in their usual order, reaching for each other's hands when the teacher began speaking. You can go now, Mr. Carter, the teacher, Ms. Williams said gently. They'll be fine. But leaving them was harder than he'd anticipated. These girls, who'd been his entire world for 5 years, were taking their first steps into a life beyond his constant presence. Daddy, Elizabeth said, noticing his hesitation. We're okay. We have each other. He kissed each daughter goodbye, 9 kisses, 9 hugs, 9 whispered, I love yous, and walked out into a day that felt too empty, too quiet. At home, Mrs. Chen found him sitting in the playroom, surrounded by toys, but no children. The first day is always hardest, she said, sitting beside him. But this is what you raised them for, to be strong enough to face the world. What if the world isn't kind to them? Daniel asked. What if they face racism, prejudice? What if other kids are cruel about them being adopted, about having a white father, about being the Miller 9? Then they'll handle it, Mrs. Chen said firmly, because you've given them something most children never have, absolute certainty that they're loved, and 8 sisters who will always have their backs. She was proven right that very afternoon. Daniel arrived for pickup to find Joy surrounded by older kids who'd been teasing her about being adopted. Before he could intervene, 8 small figures surrounded Joy, facing outward like a protective circle. She's our sister, Elizabeth announced loudly. And if you're mean to one of us, you're mean to all of us. The older kids, faced with 9 determined kindergartners, retreated. Joy, safe in her circle of sisters, smiled through her tears. That evening, Daniel called a family meeting. I'm proud of how you protected each other today, but I need you to understand something. Not everyone will understand our family. Some people might say mean things. Because you're white and we're black, Grace asked with her typical directness. Sometimes yes, or because there are 9 of you, or because we don't have a traditional mom. But we have Mama Ann in heaven, Hope said, and Aunt Martha and Grandma Chen and Aunt Dorothy, Mary added. And we have you, Sarah said quietly. That's enough. Rose, never one to be left out of a conversation, launched into a detailed explanation of why their family was actually superior to traditional families, using logic that was both completely flawed and oddly compelling. By the time she finished, everyone was laughing, the tension broken. The school year progressed with typical childhood dramas magnified by 9. Grace got in trouble for reading during math because she'd already figured it out. Faith joined every sports team that would take a kindergartner. Hope painted a mural on the bathroom wall without permission. Mary appointed herself class nurse. Sarah started a detective club to solve the mystery of missing lunch money. Rebecca discovered the school's ventilation system and mapped it extensively. Joy organized a kindergarten musical. Rose talked so much during class, she got her own special talking time, 5 minutes each hour, where she could say whatever she wanted. Elizabeth ran for class president and won by organizing her sisters into a formidable campaign team. But it was the Christmas pageant that truly showed how far they'd come. Each girl had a part in the nativity play. Grace was the narrator, reading with perfect clarity. Faith and Rebecca were shepherds, though Rebecca kept wandering off to explore. Hope had painted the backdrop. Mary was Virgin Mary, taking her role very seriously. Sarah was the innkeeper, delivering her one line with surprising emotion. Joy led the angel choir. Rose was the star, which mainly involved talking about being a star. And Elizabeth somehow had convinced the teachers to let her be both a wise man and the director's assistant. Daniel sat in the audience between Martha and Mrs. Chen, Robert and Dorothy, flanking them. Mr. Peterson was there, grumbling about parking, but secretly proud. The church community filled 3 rows. Parents who'd once questioned their family now smiled and waved. As his daughters performed, Daniel thought about the journey from 9 crying infants in an orphanage to these confident, talented, loved little girls on stage. Each had found her voice, her passion, her place, not just in their family, but in the world. The program listed them as the Miller sisters, and below that, in smaller text, daughters of Daniel Carter and the late Ann Miller Carter. Seeing Ann's name there, officially connected to these girls she'd never met, but had somehow made possible, Daniel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. After the show, as they walked to the car through light snow, Joy asked, "Daddy, are you crying?" "Happy tears, baby. Happy tears." "Because we did good," Faith asked. "Because you did perfect," Daniel said, though that wasn't quite right. They hadn't been perfect. Grace had corrected the teacher's pronunciation twice. Faith had knocked over a shepherd's staff. Hope had painted outside the lines on purpose. Mary had helped another angel who'd forgotten her lines, disrupting the flow. Sarah had added 3 unauthorized lines to build her character. Rebecca had definitely been exploring backstage during the second act. Joy had sung louder than the rest of the choir combined. Rose had given an impromptu speech about stars that wasn't in the script. Elizabeth had directed from on stage, visible to everyone. They'd been themselves, chaotic, unique, irrepressible, and absolutely perfect in their imperfection. That night, after baths and stories and 9 goodnight kisses, Daniel sat in the living room with his chosen family. Martha was knitting. She'd taken up Anne's hobby, making blankets for each girl. Robert was fixing a toy Elizabeth had taken apart to see how it worked. Mrs. Chen was preparing tomorrow's breakfast prep. Dorothy was organizing the week's homework schedule. "We've built something beautiful here," Martha said quietly. "Anne would be so proud." "Remember when you thought I was insane?" Daniel asked. "You were insane," Robert said. "Are insane. This whole thing is insane." "The best kind of insane," Mrs. Chen added, smiling. From upstairs came a giggle, then another, then all 9 girls laughing at something only they understood. The sound filled the house, spilled out the windows into the night. a symphony of joy that had grown from sorrow. Daniel closed his eyes, listening to his daughter's laughter, surrounded by the family they'd all chosen in the house they'd fought to save. 5 years ago, he'd been a broken man standing in the rain. Now he was father to 9, brother to many, son to an elderly Chinese woman who'd adopted him as surely as he'd adopted the girls. "Thank you, Anne," he whispered, knowing somehow she heard him. "Thank you for telling me not to let the love die. Look what it grew into." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. 9 girls meant 9 times the homework, the drama, the clothes that would be outgrown, the dreams to be nurtured. There would be first crushes and broken hearts, triumphs and failures, moments of joy and sorrow. But tonight, in this moment, with laughter upstairs and love surrounding him, Daniel Carter knew he'd done the impossible. He'd taken 9 abandoned babies and given them not just a home, but an identity. They were the Miller 9 sisters by choice, daughters, by love, family, by the grace of God, and the determination of one grieving man who'd refused to let love die.